Chapter 1021. Clues. The next morning, Harry awoke to find the corner of his clothes peeking out from under the bed. It was then that the hazy memories of the previous night began to resurface. He leapt out of bed, crouched down, and squinted into the dim space beneath. 2 rows of stacked lunchboxes left him momentarily speechless, confirming that the events of last night were not just a strange dream. "Dobby and Winky brought you a bunch of pies and cakes last night?" Harry exclaimed, eager to share this revelation with Ron and Hermione. As he left the common room and hurried to the Great Hall for breakfast, he anticipated Ron's usual misunderstanding of the situation. "I knew it wasn't just my imagination. I could smell the pie. Why didn't they bring some for me too?" Ron grumbled, clearly annoyed. "I gave Dobby a pair of socks last Christmas." "It's not about the food, Ron." Harry deftly sidestepped Angelina, greeting her as he passed. He then turned to Ron and Hermione, his expression serious. "The real issue is the crisis that Winky and Dobby mentioned. Dobby said that Hogwarts is facing a threat comparable to Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets. What could that mean?" "It means Hogwarts might be in danger of closing," Hermione replied sternly, her words nearly causing Harry and Ron to stumble on the stairs. The 2 boys, supporting each other, finally regained their balance. They looked to Hermione, who always provided sound advice and could see the truth in any situation. Harry hoped to see a hint of humor in her eyes, but her serious brown gaze told him she was not joking. "You're kidding, Hermione," Ron said dismissively. "Hogwarts closing? Didn't your book, A History of Hogwarts, mention that the school has stood for 1,000 years? No one can shut it down. Besides, with Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine here, even you-know-who wouldn't dare cause trouble." Ron's words hinted at the underlying confidence among those who believed the Dark Lord had returned, yet were not panicking. "Actually, A History of Hogwarts tells me more than you think, Ron," Hermione retorted as they resumed their hurried pace. Her curly hair bounced rhythmically in the morning breeze, like seaweed swaying underwater. "The Ministry of Magic, despite the senior deputy minister's support from the board of directors, failed to gain entry into Hogwarts. Her wand was broken by Neville, and she ended up in St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies." "Do you think they'll just let that go, Ron?" "But what can they do?" Ron countered. "They can't touch Professor Dumbledore or Professor Blaine, can they?" "If you had read Hogwarts: A History, you wouldn't be so optimistic, Ron," Hermione said grimly. "I suspect they might try something underhanded. It seems my suspicions were right." Harry pressed for more information, but Hermione remained tight-lipped, simply saying, "Just wait and see, Harry. Soon, everyone will know." The trio burst into the Great Hall from the entrance hall. Harry immediately scanned the faculty table and sensed something amiss. Professor Blaine was absent, as was Professor Dumbledore, and the remaining professors wore somber expressions. Professor McGonagall sat with a sorrowful look, untouched breakfast before her, as she gazed at the students. The Great Hall was still lively, but noticeably quieter than usual, with many students already heading to their classes. "When did you start keeping secrets, Hermione?" Ron grumbled, frowning at her. He quickly pulled out a bench and sat down, muttering, "I'm starving," as he rubbed his stomach of his lips. "Mr. Potter, if you could kindly join us in the present moment, it would be greatly appreciated," Snape drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Harry quickly straightened up, feeling the eyes of the entire class on him. The potions classroom was as gloomy as ever, the dim light casting long shadows across the stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of various concoctions simmering in cauldrons, a testament to the many years of potion-making that had taken place within these walls. As Snape began the lesson, Harry's mind drifted back to the morning's peculiar breakfast. The absence of the usual abundance of food was unsettling, and the whispers among the Slytherins only added to his unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was happening at Hogwarts, something that went beyond the Ministry's interference. Hermione, seated next to him, was diligently taking notes, her quills scratching against the parchment. She seemed to sense Harry's distraction and nudged him gently. "Focus, Harry," she whispered, her eyes flicking towards Snape, who was now demonstrating a complex potion on the board. Harry nodded, trying to push his concerns to the back of his mind. Yet the thought of Draco Malfoy and his cronies potentially following in their father's dark footsteps lingered. The idea that Hogwarts could be harboring future Death Eaters was a chilling one. As the lesson progressed, Harry's thoughts returned to Atticus Blaine, the new professor who had joined Hogwarts the previous year. Blaine was a mysterious figure with a reputation for being both brilliant and enigmatic. Harry had always felt a sense of trust towards him, perhaps because Blaine had been present at Voldemort's resurrection and had shown unwavering support for Dumbledore. Harry resolved to speak with Blaine after class. If anyone could provide insight into the strange happenings at Hogwarts, it would be him. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the lesson, Harry gathered his things and made his way to the front of the classroom, determined to find answers. "Ah, it seems Mr. Potter has finally awakened from his dream of saving the world," he remarked with a sly grin, the words dripping with sarcasm. End of chapter. Chapter 1022, Funding Problems at Hogwarts. The sun shone brightly outside, yet the potions classroom remained stiflingly hot and humid. A gentle breeze stirred the curtains, casting dim, wavering light across Harry's stern face. "No," Harry replied coldly. Ever since Sirius had been exonerated and acknowledged him, Harry understood why Snape was so eager to target him in potions class. Snape had been at odds with Harry's father and Sirius during their time at Hogwarts, and their animosity was legendary. "No?" The potions classroom descended into its usual oppressive silence. No student dared to speak, while Hermione and Ron exchanged knowing glances with Harry. 10 points from Gryffindor, Potter," Snape announced, his dark eyes as empty as an abyss, fixed on Harry with disdain. "For skipping out on my class," he added in a softer, more sinister tone. "Consider this a friendly reminder, Potter. If you continue to squander materials with your foolish antics, Gryffindor might find itself with no points left by the end of this class." Harry wanted to retort that Snape was bluffing. Surely, he wouldn't dare deduct all of Gryffindor's points. If he did, Professor McGonagall would certainly have something to say about it. But a glimpse of Hermione's thoughtful frown distracted him momentarily. By the time he refocused, Snape had returned to the podium and was writing the name of the potion they were to prepare, Intelligence Enhancer. "You will need to work together to complete this potion." Snape's cold gaze swept across the classroom, lingering maliciously on Harry and Neville. 4 people per group. Each group will submit their potion after class. Any group that fails will have the privilege of venturing into the Forbidden Forest after dark to collect leech mucus for us. Hermione quickly gathered the necessary ingredients from the student storage cabinet. Under her direction, the group divided the tasks. Ron sliced the ginger root, Neville crushed the dried scarab beetles into powder, Harry diluted the armadillo bile, and Hermione meticulously copied the brewing instructions and precautions from the blackboard. "This punishment is quite novel," Ron muttered, glancing nervously at Snape, who prowled the room in his cloak. Where did he come up with the idea of sending students to collect leech slime in the Forbidden Forest? "That's not so difficult," Neville grunted as he ground the scarabs. "If you've ever helped Snape with frog entrails, you'd know. But when did he start taking cues from Professor Blaine to have students work in teams? That's never happened before." "To save on materials, I suppose," Hermione replied, lighting the alcohol lamp and setting up the crucible. "I noticed when I fetched the ingredients, the scarabs prepared by Professor Snape aren't enough for each student. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw still have classes, so he asked 4 people to complete 1 potion. She gave Harry a meaningful look. "Since first year, Harry, when has Professor Snape ever warned you not to waste materials?" Harry opened his mouth, reflecting on the various criticisms and targeting he had endured in potions class over his 4 years at Hogwarts. He realized Hermione was right. "What do you mean?" he asked, recalling the 2 kind house elves who had brought him food the previous night, the noticeably lower quality of breakfast that morning, and Professor McGonagall's somber expression. Atticus Blaine, the young wizard, had a vague suspicion forming in his mind. "Hogwarts is out of money," Hermione stated calmly, as she poured Harry's diluted armadillo bile into the cauldron, stirring it carefully with her wand. With the 3rd task approaching, she was keen to avoid wasting time in the Forbidden Forest dealing with leeches. After stirring 10 times clockwise, Hermione reached out to Ron for the ginger root slices. When no response came, she glanced up to find Ron and the others at the table staring at her in astonishment. "No money at Hogwarts?" Ron echoed, his expression revealing that this was the first time he had considered that Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry might require funding. Hermione, slightly annoyed, picked up the unevenly sliced ginger from Ron's chopping board and tossed them into the cauldron, watching the armadillo bile bubble intently. "Is there something you don't understand, Ron?" Hermione sighed, her breath causing the orange-red flame of the alcohol lamp to flicker. "Professors need salaries, students need meals. Magical supplies are necessary for courses, and the castle requires maintenance and repairs. All of these need funding. Hagrid's vegetable garden can grow pumpkins, not gold." "Neville, keep going. I need more scarab powder," she urged. Perhaps it was the reluctance to venture into the Forbidden Forest for leeches, or maybe it was the novelty of working together in potions class, but most students were diligently focused. However, Draco, once Snape's favorite, seemed distracted, spilling half of the beetle powder that Nott had painstakingly prepared. The trio around Hermione remained silent, not because their questions were answered, but because they were stunned by the realization they had overlooked. Hogwarts needed money. Harry's previously frozen thoughts began to thaw as he recalled his introduction to the wizarding world and Hogwarts. When Hagrid first guided him into this magical realm, Harry had worried about affording tuition, a concern quickly alleviated by the gold his parents had left in Gringotts' underground vault. Reflecting now, Harry realized that Hogwarts did not charge tuition. Students purchased their own wands, robes, cauldrons, telescopes, and other materials, but they never paid even a bronze nut to Hogwarts. Yet, as Hermione pointed out, nearly 1,000 students needed daily sustenance, and their magical education consumed significant resources. Even if Harry didn't know the exact value of these materials, he understood that over the years, the costs were substantial. "Where does Hogwarts get the money?" Ron asked, his face pale as he grasped the enormity of the situation. Supporting his education, along with his siblings, was already a strain on his parents, with many of his belongings being second-hand. The thought of Hogwarts raising nearly 1,000 children was overwhelming. Before Hermione could respond, a sudden cry of pain erupted from the Slytherin students. All eyes turned to see Pansy Parkinson, her hands covered in boils from a scalding potion, looking tearfully at Draco Malfoy, the apparent culprit. "Take Miss Parkinson to the infirmary, Malfoy," Snape instructed, his eyebrows twitching as he swiftly approached. With a wave of his wand, he quelled the potion's explosive reaction, then addressed Draco, who stood with a blank expression. "Also, you all need to go. Meet me in the Forbidden Forest after school today," Snape instructed, his voice cold and unyielding. Atticus Blaine was taken aback by Snape's harshness, surprised that he would send him to the Forbidden Forest to gather leeches. However, the sharp pain of his Parkinson's disease left him little room to question the decision. Frustrated, he grabbed his school bag, kicked the bench aside, and helped Pansy out of the classroom. "I understand now. It's the board of directors." Neville suddenly spoke up, having watched Atticus and Pansy leave. Harry and Ron turned to look at Neville, noticing the anger simmering in his eyes as he glared at Atticus's retreating figure. "If the Board of Governors suspends funding for Hogwarts..." End of this chapter. Chapter 1023, Gratitude and Resentment. As we all know, Hogwarts was founded 1,000 years ago by 4 great wizards, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. These founders hailed from the most prestigious pure-blood wizard families of their time. Despite their backgrounds, these remarkable young wizards possessed rare open-mindedness and foresight. They understood that the continuation of magic required inclusivity and that talented children of Muggle origin should be given the opportunity to learn the secrets of magic, though Slytherin held differing views. This belief led to the establishment of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry amidst the mountains and dark waters. Initially, the 4 founders jointly managed the school, imparting their extensive knowledge to many wizard descendants from renowned families who admired their magic. They also recruited students from the Muggle world. At the outset, tuition fees were charged to all students to support the school's operations. However, the founders soon realized a problem. While the fees were manageable for magical families, many talented Muggle-born children could not afford to study at Hogwarts. In response, the founders decided to waive tuition for these children. Although this gesture was met with gratitude, it also introduced new challenges. The perceived discrimination led to dissatisfaction within the wizarding community. In an era where bloodline was paramount and teaching Muggles magic was frowned upon, such actions brought heavy criticism to the fledgling Hogwarts. After much deliberation, the founders decided to abolish tuition fees for all students, with all expenses covered by themselves. As years passed, 3 of the founders passed away, leaving Helga Hufflepuff as the first headmistress of Hogwarts. To keep the school running, she exhausted her family's wealth, leading to a difficult life in her later years. Her successor, lacking the financial resources, reinstated the tuition system. This decision caused magic education to become exclusive once more, limited to pureblood families and a few wealthy Muggle descendants. Muggle-born wizards, unable to form a significant presence, struggled to integrate into the magical world. A significant change occurred in the 3rd century after Hogwarts' founding. A Muggle-born wizard became headmaster and sought ways to provide magical education to more impoverished but gifted Muggle children. After careful consideration, he sought assistance from several prestigious pureblood families. In exchange for their financial support, he offered some of his powers as headmaster and allowed them a say in Hogwarts leadership. Thus, the Hogwarts Board of Directors was established. Phew! Harry, Ron, and Neville sighed after reading the lengthy chapter about the Board of Directors in the thick tome, A History of Hogwarts. Hermione sat in the library, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The 3 friends exchanged glances through the flickering candlelight, each noticing the surprise, emotion, and tenderness in the other's eyes. "I never thought about it," Ron began, but was abruptly cut off by a sharp, disapproving snort from Madame Pince, who was seated by the door engrossed in a book on magical herbs. Her hawk-like gaze silenced Ron, who quickly lowered his head. Hermione's fingers traced the dark yellow pages once more. The text read, "The members of the Board of Directors are not fixed. In fact, due to the enormous financial burden, the original board was rotated within half a century of its establishment. To effectively manage teaching costs, the successors of the board instructed the headmaster of Hogwarts to strictly control expenses for various magical subjects. They reviewed educational materials and removed many ancient, powerful spells that were deemed wasteful in the learning process." Hermione sighed softly as she continued reading. In the following century, the number of Muggle-born wizards increased rapidly, causing discontent among pure-blood, odd families. Consequently, the board ordered Hogwarts to limit the admission of Muggle-born students, which met with strong resistance from the school. In retaliation, the board suspended financial support, and Hogwarts stopped admitting pure-blood descendants. Eventually, the Ministry of Magic intervened. To prevent extreme ideologies from affecting Hogwarts teaching, the board expanded from 6 to 12 members. They gained the power to appoint and dismiss the headmaster while ensuring financial support for Hogwarts. This agreement was overseen by the Ministry of Magic. As they left the library and walked through the ancient corridors of the castle, Harry appeared lost in thought. When people speak of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, they often mention its 1,000-year history. Yet few realize the many trials it has endured over the centuries. It is like a beautiful flower growing in the cracks of rocks. Its resilience commands respect, but its fragility evokes unease. "I see." Ron suddenly stopped under a burning torch, his face lighting up with sudden realization. "What did you understand?" Hermione asked, glancing at him. With Hogwarts facing such a crisis, her mood was understandably somber, especially since the turmoil seemed partly due to Muggle-born students like herself. "Malfoy!" Ron exclaimed, his eyes wide with inappropriate excitement. Malfoy looked unhappy today. Not just him, but all the Slytherins seemed off. "Do you think they're worried that if Hogwarts fights back, it might expel all pure-blood students like it did in the past? Are Malfoy and his gang afraid of being expelled?" "From school?" Harry's green eyes sparkled with a peculiar light. Was this what they called a blessing in disguise? Hermione, too weary to respond, simply shook her head and sighed, which only fueled Ron's indignation. "I must warn you, Ron," Hermione began, but before Ron could question her further, Neville, who had been quietly observing, interjected with a wry smile. "The Longbottom family and the Weasley family are both ancient wizarding lineages. If Hogwarts repeats history, we might face expulsion, just like Malfoy." End of this chapter. Chapter 1/24. Generous Harry. The sky outside the castle had shifted from a clear blue to a somber grayish-dark blue. On the campus lawn, a commotion had erupted around the Beauxbatons carriage. The Pegassi, tasked with pulling the carriage, were agitated and in a heated exchange with Hagrid, who was attempting to feed them. "What's going on, Hagrid?" Mark's wife, Olympe, hurriedly descended from the carriage, her concern evident. "Oh, just a few minor problems, Olympe. I can fix them quickly," Hagrid assured her, holding a wine barrel in one hand while trying to steady the bridle with the other. He attempted to puff out his chest in confidence, but under Madame Maxime's skeptical gaze, he quickly relented. Loosening the reins, he admitted, "Your Pegassi are clever, Olympe. I just mixed a little water with the malt whiskey. Don't be angry, Olympe. I swear it was just a little bit." Hagrid's voice trailed off, and the four young wizards standing in the corridor on the 4th floor could no longer hear the commotion. They withdrew their heads, exchanging glances. Under normal circumstances, this scene might have been amusing, but given the current challenges facing Hogwarts, laughter was elusive. "Let's go," Hermione said somberly, taking the lead. A heavy mood hung over the group, each child burdened with worries about their future at Hogwarts. In their quest to uncover the complex relationship between the school board and Hogwarts, they had spent several afternoons in the library after classes, squeezing in meals and exercises. The ceiling of the great hall mirrored the cloudy night sky. The little wizards at the 4 long tables whispered among themselves, the atmosphere far from its usual cheerfulness. Harry glanced at the food on the table, noting the reduced quantity and variety. "What's going on? What are you talking about?" Ron asked, frowning as he approached Ginny and Colin, who were deep in conversation. "Oh, you didn't know yet?" Ernie interjected eagerly from the Hufflepuff table, unable to contain the news. "Hogwarts is in a serious financial crisis. How did you know?" Harry asked, surprised. "Isn't it obvious?" Ernie replied, gesturing at the dining table. "Cedric asked Professor Sprout during herbology class this afternoon." Hannah, sitting beside Ernie, turned around, her face pale. "You all noticed that today's breakfast and lunch weren't as lavish as usual, and many professors had students practice in groups during class. Cedric found it odd and approached Professor Sprout, who mentioned the school was facing some minor operational issues." Hannah's account was closer to what Cedric had learned from Professor Sprout, but Ernie's version was more aligned with the gravity of the situation. "Did Professor Sprout tell Cedric what the school plans to do?" Neville asked, his brow furrowed. "Professor Sprout said that Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine are working on a solution," Hannah replied, nodding towards the empty seats at the staff table. Professors Dumbledore, Blaine, McGonagall, and Sprout were all absent. A sense of indignation welled up in Harry. What were the professors planning? Would they capitulate to the board of directors? "I'd rather starve than let that toad teach at Hogwarts," Neville declared, his fists clenched, his face pale with anger. "This is outrageous." Hermione's face mirrored Neville's fury, while Ron looked bewildered, clearly unaware of the dire situation they faced. But in truth, it wasn't just Ron. How much could a group of young students truly understand about the complexities of their predicament? What do children do about money problems? A few people gradually joined the long table, eating their meals with a lackluster demeanor while listening to the almost monotonous discussions about the Hogwarts crisis. Atticus Blaine had yet to hear anyone mention the person responsible for this crisis. Currently, the only solution seemed to be relying on Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine to persuade the board of directors to continue their investment. Who else, apart from the board that comprises the wealthiest families in the wizarding world, could afford such a massive expenditure? Yet, aside from accepting the board's decisions, Atticus couldn't fathom how they could convince the board to continue funding willingly. His eyes roamed the hall in boredom until he suddenly noticed Professor McGonagall and Professor Sprout descending the stairs to the entrance hall instead of heading to the faculty table. Both professors were dressed in formal robes, and Professor Sprout still wore his dusty, patched hat. They appeared serious and seemed to be leaving the castle. As if driven by an unseen force, Atticus leaped from his seat. Under the surprised gazes of Ron and the others, he quickly ran toward the hallway. "Professor McGonagall! Professor Sprout!" Atticus called out, halting the two professors as they were about to exit the castle gates and descend the marble steps. "Mr. Potter?" Hearing Atticus's shout, the two professors stopped and turned to face him. Professor McGonagall looked him over and asked, "What is it, Mr. Potter? Are you going to negotiate with the school board as well?" Atticus blurted out without thinking. "Oh, Mr. Potter!" Professor McGonagall exclaimed in surprise. "You already know that the school board has suspended funding? I suppose Miss Granger told you that?" Professor Sprout smiled kindly at the group, who had also run over with Atticus. Seeing their eager young faces, Professor McGonagall's expression softened. She pursed her lips. "The negotiations with the board of directors will be handled by Headmaster Dumbledore and Professor Blaine. Mr. Potter, Professor Sprout and I have other matters to attend to." "What is it?" Atticus asked bluntly, though Professor McGonagall did not find him rude. "I'm going to Hogsmeade with Professor Sprout. We've arranged a meeting with the villagers there to ask them to continue supplying Hogwarts as usual. Hogwarts will settle their remuneration once we overcome this crisis. In other words, on credit." Atticus understood immediately and blurted out, "I still have a lot of gold in the vault at Gringotts, Professor. If Hogwarts needs it, you can take it all." Fearing that Professor McGonagall might refuse, he quickly added, "Sirius won't let me starve." Hermione, Ron, and Neville all looked at Atticus in shock, not expecting him to make such an offer. Professors McGonagall and Sprout were equally surprised. Regaining her composure, McGonagall blew her nose with emotion, patted Atticus on the shoulder, and said softly, "Thank you for your generous offer, Mr. Potter, but Hogwarts has not yet reached such a dire state. There is still a considerable amount of gold in the school's vault, enough to support operations for a while. Of course, it must be used wisely. I believe that Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine will resolve the issue before the gold runs out. This is what Professor Blaine promised me." After saying this, Professor McGonagall gave the worried young wizards a reassuring smile and hurried away with Professor Sprout. The flickering flames illuminated Atticus's face, mirroring the anger in his heart at that moment. There was a commotion in the hall behind him. Hermione turned quickly and saw that it was Professor Snape leading Malfoy, Parkinson, and Nott. As Atticus Blaine and Blaise stepped out, the boil on Parkinson's hand had already been treated by Madame Pomfrey. Professor Snape cast a cold glance in their direction before striding away with his head held high. The Slytherin students trailing behind him seemed subdued, perhaps due to their current mood, and they merely glanced at Atticus and Blaise before following Snape. Several Gryffindors watched gloomily as Snape led his students into the venue, their figures quickly fading into the dimness of the early evening. "Hey!" Neville suddenly called out, capturing everyone's attention. He then turned to Harry with a meaningful look. "Harry, would you like to find a chance to vent your anger? I mean, to teach those troublesome people who put Hogwarts in danger a lesson." Chapter 1025, Malfoy's Fear. It was not unusual for professors to gather materials from the Forbidden Forest. When Remus was the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts, he would venture into the swamps of the Forbidden Forest to capture Hinkypunks and Kappas. The boggart he used for teaching was also caught in an abandoned room of the castle. Professor Sprout occasionally visited the Forbidden Forest to dig up wild vegetables or collect manure. As for Hagrid, the magical creatures he introduced to the young wizards in class were all native to the Forbidden Forest. Snape, too, sourced some of the ingredients for his potions classes from deep within the forest. For professors, this was part of their routine work. Following a secluded trail, Snape led Malfoy and a few others through the towering trees for about an hour until they reached a large swamp near the Black Lake. Thick miasma floated over the irregular puddles, twisting into bizarre shapes with the breeze. The rotting corpses of animals floating in the water emitted a strong stench. Malfoy glanced around and noticed a faint orange-red glow in the mist. The light pulsed like a heartbeat, exuding an alluring temptation. After a moment of confusion, Malfoy quickly became alert, realizing it was a hinky-punk trap meant to lure the lost into the swamp. "What should we do?" Malfoy asked Snape, his voice rousing Pansy, Theodore, and Blaise from their temporary daze. Snape pulled several large glass bottles from his robes, handing one to each of them. "Don't venture too deep into the swamp. Stay at the edge." "And how do we find leeches, Professor Snape?" Pansy Parkinson asked, her face pale as the eerie howling of ghosts and wolves filled the air, adding to the terrifying atmosphere. The dull waves crashing against the lakeshore only heightened the anxiety of the young wizards. "There's no need to search, Miss Parkinson," Snape replied, his tone lazy but lacking the usual sarcasm. "Stand in the water, and they will come to you." Snape's casual words made Pansy retch, and the other three boys shivered. "Don't stand together. Each of you should keep a distance. Let me see the light of your wands. If you're in danger, signal me. Fill the glass bottle I gave you, and we'll return." Reluctantly, they complied. Holding back the nauseating stench, Malfoy removed his shoes and stepped into the water, feeling his feet sink into the mud. Snape remained on the bank. After offering Pansy some advice, he returned to Malfoy's side. "What are you afraid of, Draco?" Snape asked suddenly, his calm gaze fixed on Draco, who was bent over, using his wand to stiffen leeches one by one. Draco, eager to fill the glass bottle and return to the castle, shuddered, straightened up slowly, and turned to face Snape with a pale expression. "I'm not afraid of anything, Professor," Draco replied. "Don't lie to me, Draco," Snape said, his eyes piercing through Draco Malfoy, whose face was almost paler than the light from his wand. Under Snape's dark gaze, Draco knew he couldn't hide his fear. He lowered his head, staring at the ink-black water in silence. "This is not what I want to see," Draco finally admitted dejectedly. "I know what the school is going through now. After the Deputy Minister of Magic was expelled from Hogwarts, my father wrote to me, telling me that the school board plans to cut off funding to force Professor Blaine to submit. This is not what I want to see. I wrote to my father." Atticus Blaine had warned him not to get involved, but he insisted it was beyond his control. "This is none of your business, Draco," Snape said calmly. "Do you really think you can meddle in the conflict between the Ministry of Magic and Atticus Blaine?" Draco's lips moved, but no sound emerged. The dispute between the Ministry and Professor Blaine was, in essence, a conflict between Blaine and the Dark Lord. Draco was well aware of his father's allegiance to the Dark Lord, even without being told. When news of the Dark Lord's resurrection broke, Dumbledore and Professor Blaine immediately declared their intent to fight him to the bitter end. At that time, Draco and some of his classmates, driven by their own naive ambitions, decided to follow Professor Blaine's lead. However, they were met with a head-on blow from Blaine himself. It was then that Draco truly grasped the harsh reality of the situation. If the Dark Lord prevailed, his esteemed Professor Blaine would be doomed. Conversely, if Blaine emerged victorious, the outcome would be even more dire, as his father would undoubtedly face retribution. Professor Blaine was known for his intolerance of any betrayal. The current troubles at Hogwarts were merely a precursor to the intensifying struggle. "There are rumors," Draco stammered, his eyes flickering with uncertainty, "that you followed the Dark Lord, didn't you, Professor?" Rumors had long circulated at Hogwarts about Snape's past as a Death Eater, but no concrete evidence had ever surfaced. A chilly wind swept through, causing distant bushes to sway. Snape squinted in their direction, but seeing nothing amiss, he turned back to Draco. "What exactly are you trying to say, Draco?" Snape's face paled slightly, his eyes sharp and probing. He didn't answer Draco's question, but instead posed one of his own. "Oh, Draco bit his lip, his chest rising and falling with hesitation. "I was just wondering, who do you think will win?" Snape's eyebrows arched, a hint of sarcasm tugging at the corner of his mouth, before his expression returned to its usual calm. "You want to know which side will win, Draco. Why not be honest?" Snape's dark eyes seemed to pierce through Draco's facade. "You're trying to decide which side to pledge your loyalty to, aren't you?" Draco mustered the courage to meet Snape's gaze, though shame clouded his gray eyes. Only by siding with the winner can you survive. That's what my father taught me. Snape, observing Draco's conflicted expression, found himself at a loss for words. Aligning with the victor was indeed the Malfoy way, and it resonated with Slytherin values. Snape's gaze softened as he looked at Draco, seeing echoes of himself and Lucius from 2 decades past. "Which side would you rather see win, Draco?" Snape asked softly after a long pause. Draco began, but Snape interrupted. "You don't need to tell me the answer. It's in your heart. You just need to understand it yourself, Draco. It's not about siding with the winner, but about joining the side you want to win and helping them achieve victory." Draco's gray eyes reflected confusion. Join whichever side you hope to win. The breeze by the water carried away Draco's murmured words. Which side did he truly want to win? There was no doubt that if the Dark Lord triumphed, the Malfoy family would reap significant benefits. Even now, some of the Dark Lord's ideals held a certain allure for Draco, and if the Dark Lord were to dominate the British wizarding world, the Malfoy family would undoubtedly. The unwavering support for him will undoubtedly be rewarded, and the Malfoy family will become even more illustrious than it is today. However, if Professor Atticus Blaine ultimately triumphs over the Dark Lord, the Malfoy family will face significant losses in the aftermath of the war. It would be fortunate if his parents only ended up spending the rest of their lives in Azkaban. Draco pondered whether he should align himself with his father's camp, abandon those unrealistic hero dreams, and focus on tangible interests. Yet, the image of a young face with gray hair and striking purple eyes frequently appeared in his mind. This person always wore a gentle smile, yet was as merciless to his enemies as the harshest winter is to all living things. Did Draco truly wish to oppose such a formidable wizard? End of this chapter. Chapter 1026, Catching Leeches. The sudden emergence of Atticus Blaine transformed many people's preconceived notions about Slytherin House. Before Atticus became a prominent figure, Slytherins were often stereotyped as individuals solely focused on personal gain, exclusionary towards Muggle-borns, and proponents of the outdated belief in pureblood supremacy. They were seen as ambitious, often to a fault, within any organization. Beyond these traits, Slytherins seemed to dismiss everything else. Despite Atticus Blaine's unparalleled magical prowess, Draco found it challenging to describe Professor Blaine accurately. However, one undeniable fact was that Professor Blaine possessed an extraordinary charisma. In some respects, he was even more captivating than Dumbledore, as Albus Dumbledore had never managed to conquer Slytherin in the same way. Snape moved away to check on Pansy, who was quietly sobbing. In the dim morning light, Draco stood by the water, lost in thought and speechless for a long time. "Humph!" Neville, hidden behind the bushes and huddled under the invisibility cloak with Harry and Ron, snorted and muttered quietly, "Fence-sitter." This comment resonated with Harry. In this tense moment, when everyone was silent, Malfoy seemed to be contemplating which side to join. "You can't say that, Neville," Hermione interjected. She had accompanied them, ostensibly to prevent any reckless actions, and used a disillusionment charm to conceal herself, since Harry's invisibility cloak couldn't accommodate 4 people. She glanced at Draco, who was still lost in thought by the water, and said calmly, "Malfoy is undoubtedly worried. Harry, you saw Malfoy's father at the scene of you-know-who's resurrection, confirming he is indeed a Death Eater. In this situation, Malfoy faces a difficult choice. Supporting Professor Blaine means defying his parents, while supporting the Dark Lord is daunting. I suspect he fears Professor Blaine more than the Dark Lord, having never encountered the latter. Moreover, I believe Malfoy admires Professor Blaine. Slytherin House is captivated by him, making it difficult for Malfoy to act." "He deserves this," Ron said bluntly. "It's because he has a Death Eater for a father. Who would idolize an evil dark wizard like you-know-who? Oh, should we still go through with this?" Ron wrinkled his nose and added, "Aren't we here to punish Malfoy? His father led the school board and caused trouble for Hogwarts. Now that the old bat is gone, this is a golden opportunity." "Oh no!" Hermione immediately became stern, glaring at the 3 boys with intensity. "If Snape finds out, what do you think will happen? He'll expel us all from Hogwarts." Unless Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine agree, Snape can't be removed, Neville, who was usually intimidated by Snape, said with newfound confidence. He smiled and added, "And you're pretty upset about what Malfoy's dad did, aren't you, Hermione?" "But that's not the same thing." Hermione could only identify the three boys under the invisibility cloak by their voices. She scolded them anxiously. "It's Malfoy's father who did the wrong thing, not Malfoy. You all heard it just now. Malfoy even wrote a letter to his father, advising him against it." "For that reason," Harry hesitated, "should we be gentle?" Ron snickered, but unfortunately he didn't notice Snape, who had already dealt with Pansy's situation and was returning. The rustling bushes and the strange noise immediately caught Snape's sharp attention. "Who's there?" The Forbidden Forest was never a safe place, especially at night. Snape was always vigilant, watching for any signs of danger from poisonous creatures or ferocious beasts. Before his shout had even faded, Snape had drawn his wand, and the air was filled with the sharp sound of it slicing through the darkness. "Fire! Call!" The surging flames quickly consumed the air, banishing the darkness. Amidst the ferocious roar of the magical flames, 4 spells appeared almost simultaneously, their clarity diminished. Yet Snape captured them with precision. He gazed at the invisible magic barrier, its shape outlined by the severed flames. After a moment of astonishment, anger flashed in Snape's black eyes. The swaying bushes and trampled weeds revealed the location of the bold Gryffindors. With a swift motion, he raised his wand, sending several crescent-shaped silver flashes slicing through the air with a heart-pounding whistle. In an instant, they struck a 40-foot-high tree. Crack! A series of sharp noises echoed as branches snapped, and the trunk crashed to the ground with a thunderous bang, effectively blocking a narrow path out of the swamp. The earth trembled like an earthquake, knocking the 4 young wizards attempting to escape to the ground. The ensuing gust blew away the invisibility cloaks from Harry, Ron, and Neville's heads. Pansy, Nott, and Blaise rushed over upon hearing the commotion. Draco, suppressing his worry and panic, leaped from the water and hurried to Professor Snape. When he saw Harry and the others felled by the branches, he paused, his expression shifting to one of amusement. "Oops!" Snape's sharp voice pierced the air, and Harry knew trouble was imminent. The events that unfolded in the next split second confirmed his fears. Facing the 4 Slytherin students, their faces cold and gloating, Harry's heart sank. He wouldn't be surprised if Snape suggested to Professor McGonagall and Professor Dumbledore that they be expelled for secretly following the professor and venturing into the Forbidden Forest at night. Snape's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he regarded the 4 silent Gryffindors. "Let me think," he said in a silky voice. "You 4 were probably trying to return to the Gryffindor common room, but got lost in the castle and ended up in the Forbidden Forest by chance, right?" Pansy Parkinson couldn't suppress her laughter, while the other 3 boys looked on coldly. Harry was determined not to let Snape mock him, knowing it might lead to Sirius being humiliated again. He raised his head, his green eyes blazing in the light from Snape's wand. The intensity of his gaze made Snape instinctively avert his eyes. 20 points from each of you," Snape declared icily. "Next, I think you anticipate expulsion, but you're adept at concocting lies to avoid punishment, aren't you? Why don't you give it a try? Perhaps I'll be fooled by your excuses." "We're just trying to help, Professor Snape." Hermione's sudden voice cut through Snape's words. Harry glanced at her, noticing her cheeks and ears flushed red, much like Ron under pressure. "What?" Snape asked sharply. "We saw you leading Malfoy and the others towards the Forbidden Forest in the entrance hall. I remembered you mentioned in class today that students who failed to complete the intelligence enhancement potion need to collect leeches at night." "So, you're telling me, Miss Know-It-All," Snape said, using Hermione's name with a cold stare, "you're here to help collect leeches, right?" "We know that Hogwarts is in trouble. The Board of Governors has suspended funding, forcing professors to gather materials for their students themselves," Hermione continued, her voice steady despite the tension. Everyone was aware of the situation. Hermione knew it was a lie, yet she said it anyway. "So, we thought we could help out." It was a clever excuse befitting her sharp mind. However, Harry, Ron, and Neville felt a pang of guilt rather than relief. They were well aware that this wouldn't deceive Snape. Snape's breathing grew rapid, his chest heaving in a way that reminded Harry of Aunt Marge when she had been inflated after insulting his parents. Full of lies, Snape finally erupted, his voice filled with anger. I will report everything that happened tonight to Minerva. Let's see what she has to say. He glared at them with fierce intensity. But before that, you claimed you were here to help. With a swift motion, Snape pulled several large glass bottles from his pocket and tossed them onto the haystack in front of them. I generously give you this apport. Now everyone, get into the water and catch leeches. End of this chapter. To continue his reign of terror, Ron grumbled, his voice muffled by the pillow. Atticus Blaine, who had been listening quietly from his bed, finally spoke up. I think we need to focus on what we can control. Complaining won't change anything. We need to be smart about how we handle this. Harry nodded in agreement, though his mind was still clouded with frustration. Atticus is right. We can't let Snape get to us. We have to keep our heads down and get through this. Hermione, ever the voice of reason, added, and we need to be careful. We can't afford any more mistakes. The last thing we need is to give Snape another reason to punish us. The room fell silent as the weight of their predicament settled over them. Despite the challenges they faced, there was a sense of camaraderie among the group. They knew they had each other's backs, and that was a comfort in these trying times. The next morning, as the sun rose over Hogwarts, the students trudged to their classes, weary but determined. The air was thick with tension, but there was also a sense of resilience. They were Hogwarts students, after all, and they would not be easily defeated. As they entered the potions classroom, Snape's cold gaze swept over them, but they held their heads high. They would endure whatever he threw their way, and they would come out stronger for it. In the end, the dust would settle, and they would emerge victorious. They just had to hold on a little longer. He's torturing us, Ron exclaimed, glaring at Snape, who was leisurely enjoying his breakfast at the staff table. His frustration was palpable, and Harry, sensing an opportunity, dropped the apple pie he was holding, wiped his mouth, and turned eagerly to Hermione. Hermione, what does the Daily Prophet say about Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine's negotiations with the school board? Is there any report on this? Harry asked, his voice tinged with urgency. Hermione shook her head, her expression troubled. No, there's nothing. The recent newspapers have only criticized the quality of Hogwarts. Isn't it strange? The Ministry of Magic and the Board of Governors have done something disgraceful. If the wizarding world knew about the Ministry's underhanded interference with Hogwarts, the Minister of Magic's approval rating would plummet. Harry bit his lip, his worry deepening over Hogwarts' uncertain future. It was unthinkable that before Voldemort, who had returned, could cause any major trouble, the wizarding government, in a bid to maintain its authority, was forcing Hogwarts to close. With a heavy heart, Harry finished his afternoon classes. As dusk settled over the gloomy sky, the mood of the group returning to the Great Hall for dinner was equally somber. Can't it just rain? Ron grumbled, glaring at the clear sky as he tore into his bread with frustration. I don't believe Snape would make us go to the Forbidden Forest in the rain to catch leeches. Harry was about to respond when a commotion in the hallway caught his attention. A man and a woman burst into the hall, interrupting him. The witch, dressed in a banana-yellow robe with bright pink nails and elaborate, stiff curls, wore jeweled glasses and carried an alligator leather handbag. The young man trailing her was struggling to keep up, a professional camera slung over his shoulder. Hurry up, bozo. This is a rare opportunity. The witch exclaimed excitedly, ignoring the surprised stares from the students and professors. She rushed to the end of the Gryffindor table, craning her neck over a first-year student's head to scrutinize the food with great interest. For reasons unknown, she frowned in dissatisfaction. Oh, isn't it a bit too rich, bozo? It won't make for a good story if I take a photo like this. She mused, raising her thick eyebrows. After a moment's thought, she rudely pushed the students aside. Excuse me, make way, she commanded, pulling out a bench to get a better look at the table. In a flurry of motion, the witch began rearranging the food, pushing aside pudding, roast steak, and fried sausages, leaving only a few greasy pumpkin pies and boiled potatoes. Satisfied with her work, she caught sight of a half-eaten piece of bread in Colin's mouth. "Oh, lend it to me," she said, snatching the bread from Colin's mouth and tossing it onto the plate. Colin, startled, nearly fell off the bench. "That's much better now," the witch declared, nodding in satisfaction. She stepped aside as the young man with the camera set up his equipment and began photographing the leftovers. As the spectacle concluded, the witch pulled back several first-year students she had displaced and insisted they pose for a photo with the dining table, despite their evident fear. "Thank you," she said, seemingly oblivious to the chaos she had caused. The witch returned the piece of bread she had taken from Colin's mouth back to him. "Come on, bozo, let's head upstairs first. Atticus Blaine mentioned he'd be waiting for us in his office. It's on the 3rd floor, right? He mentioned that in his letter." Harry watched as the witch, in her high heels, ascended the staircase at the side of the hall, leading the photographer swiftly until they vanished from view. Rita Skeeter, a reporter for the Daily Prophet. "But what's she doing at Hogwarts?" Ron asked, bewildered. "It's not important, Ron," Hermione replied, exhaling a sigh of relief. After enduring several days of Snape's relentless scrutiny, she finally felt rejuvenated. "Didn't you catch what she said at the end? Professor Blaine is back. Oh, I believe everything is about to be resolved." End of this chapter. Chapter 1028, stripping the fierce battle with the school board, had actually concluded 2 days prior. The reason for the additional delay was Atticus Blaine's trip to Paris. Now he sat at his desk, reviewing a summary of unexpected events that had transpired at Hogwarts during his absence. Just then, Rita Skeeter knocked on his office door. Some issues were anticipated, but Atticus found it amusing that Harry and his friends had followed Severus into the Forbidden Forest and were subsequently punished by being sent there every night to gather materials for potions class. "Please come in," Atticus said, placing the documents compiled by Filch into a drawer. He straightened his expression as he spoke. "You wait here. I'll go talk to him," came a whispered instruction from outside the door. The office door swung open, revealing Rita Skeeter's heavily made-up face. "Ah, Atticus, long time no see. Have you finished the negotiations with the school board?" Rita exclaimed with a cheerful expression, striding briskly toward Atticus. As she approached, she seemed to consider giving him a hug, but the authority in his calm smile made her reconsider. Instead, she toned down her exaggerated grin and shook Atticus's hand firmly. "Good evening, Rita," Atticus nodded, smiling as he gently withdrew his hand. "You seem to be more informed than I expected. Have you already grasped the situation?" "I rushed here as soon as I received your letter." Rita, now seated on the sofa at Atticus's invitation, fiddled with her stiff curls and spoke with excitement. "Oh, I can't claim to be well informed. This matter has spread widely. Many people are aware of how the Board of Directors, under the Ministry of Magic's direction, has treated Hogwarts. Even the newspapers know you're in negotiations." After preparing tea, Atticus turned to see Rita's expectant face. She had already pulled out parchment and an automatic quill from her bag, ready to take notes. "That's true," Atticus said, placing the tea in front of Rita before sitting on the opposite side of the coffee table. "And now the negotiations have officially broken down." Rita's quill seemed to come alive with excitement, ready to craft a lengthy article from just one of Atticus's sentences. "So, you and Dumbledore are still unwilling to allow Umbridge to attend Hogwarts?" Rita asked sharply. "Even if this might provoke the Ministry of Magic and the Board of Governors to the point where Hogwarts could no longer operate?" "Allowing an unqualified professor into Hogwarts would be extremely irresponsible to the students," Atticus replied, glancing at the parchment where Rita's quill had scribbled. When discussing the potential severe consequences of breaking ties with the school board and the Ministry of Magic, Atticus Blaine stated that to protect the rights he held, he would not hesitate to close the 1,000-year-old Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, sending all its students home. "Rita," Atticus said calmly, "I didn't ask you here just to make my position public." Rita's smile faltered, and under Atticus's steady gaze, she reluctantly instructed the quill to cross out the words on the parchment. "Oh, you know, Atticus," Rita said, tilting her chin. "The newspapers are under strict ministry control. If I don't write this, the public won't understand the troubles Hogwarts is facing. You don't need to worry about that. If I didn't have the means to get your article published, I wouldn't have called you here, Atticus assured her. If that's the case, Rita Skeeter began, her curiosity piqued. It seemed as though she had been eagerly awaiting Atticus Blaine's promise. With a flourish, her quill scratched out all the words on the paper, and an exaggerated smile spread across her face. Now I can speak freely. Oh, where shall we begin? What are your thoughts on Cornelius Fudge sending his right-hand man to Hogwarts? This is undoubtedly a very unfortunate situation, Atticus replied with calm authority. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is a revered institution tasked with nurturing the brightest talents for the wizarding world. It is the cornerstone of our community's ongoing prosperity and strength. However, certain high-ranking officials at the Ministry of Magic, in their quest for power, have used flimsy excuses to justify directing the flames of political strife towards this sacred school. Such actions are despicable and shameful. On behalf of all the faculty and staff at Hogwarts, I strongly condemn them. We urge these officials to cease their misguided actions, abandon their dictatorial tendencies, and focus their efforts on fostering a harmonious and peaceful magical world. The flames of political struggle. What a perfect description. Rita Skeeter exclaimed, her grin widening with excitement. But there are rumors that the Ministry of Magic is intervening to address the declining teaching standards at Hogwarts. What is your response to this, Atticus? That is precisely the feeble excuse I mentioned earlier, Atticus replied coldly. There is no evidence to suggest that Hogwarts' teaching quality has deteriorated. Just a few days ago, Dolores Umbridge, the senior deputy minister of magic, arrived at Hogwarts with a letter of recommendation from the board of directors demanding employment. Yet, she was unable to best 3 underage wizards. This incident proves 2 things. First, Dolores Umbridge's personal magical skills are insufficient for teaching young wizards. Second, the teaching quality at Hogwarts has not declined. In fact, it has been improving steadily and has reached its zenith in this century. Atticus's words were already sharp and compelling, leaving Rita with no need to embellish them further. She recorded his statements verbatim, her excitement palpable. But aren't you concerned, Atticus? The current situation is that the Hogwarts Board of Directors firmly supports the Ministry of Magic's decision. If you and Dumbledore continue to oppose the Ministry's envoy, you both risk being dismissed by the board. Wouldn't the outcome be the same unless, of course, you plan to use your extraordinary magical powers to force the Ministry to retreat? In effect, the school board has forfeited that authority, Atticus stated calmly, causing Rita Skeeter to falter in surprise. Oh, forfeited. If I understand correctly, you mean that Hogwarts has decided to reject the board of directors' leadership? Rita asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Atticus slowly rose from the sofa, fixing Rita with a steady gaze. His resolute voice resonated through the office, leaving the seasoned journalist momentarily speechless. That's exactly what I mean, Rita. On behalf of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, I hereby warn the Board of Governors and the British wizarding community. Since most of the board members have withdrawn financial support from Hogwarts in pursuit of political gain, despite no fault on the school's part, Hogwarts has been plunged into a severe operational crisis. Therefore, from this day forward, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry will no longer be under the leadership of the Board of Directors. End of this chapter. Chapter 1029, Escorter. An owl spread its wings and soared into the endless darkness, carrying with it the article penned by Rita Skeeter under the supervision of Atticus Blaine. Who will you ask to ensure this article gets published in the Daily Prophet? Rita Skeeter inquired, tucking her quill into her crocodile leather handbag. A lingering smile of excitement played on her lips, a testament to the thrill of her recent interview with Atticus. It was no wonder she felt this way. For 7 long centuries, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry had been tightly bound to the school board. Yet, in the final decade of the 20th century, Atticus Blaine boldly declared that the board had breached their contract and would cease financial support to Hogwarts. Henceforth, Hogwarts would operate independently. The potential uproar this news could cause in the wizarding world was unimaginable. Amelia will ensure the ministry doesn't catch wind of this before the article is published, and some of my friends at the Daily Prophet will see to its publication, Atticus replied casually, sending a chill down Rita Skeeter's spine. Just 2 years ago, the young man before her was an unknown wizard, but in that short time, Atticus Blaine had woven a powerful network across Europe and even America. Such a feat couldn't be achieved by magical prowess alone. Rita Skeeter, a top current affairs reporter, quickly grasped the significance of Atticus's words. It seems Bones has unwavering support for you, doesn't she? Oh, that's truly intriguing. A politician like her. How did you persuade her to join your cause? Did you promise to back her for Minister of Magic? Atticus merely smiled, his silence only fueling Rita's curiosity. Her shorthand quill floated out of her bag once more. You're already laying the groundwork, aren't you, Atticus? This report will undoubtedly stir outrage throughout the wizarding world, and support for Cornelius Fudge will plummet to historic lows. You're planning to seize the moment to elevate Bones to power. Or perhaps... A sudden thought struck her, causing her voice to rise like a night owl's screech. Are you planning to become Minister of Magic yourself? You have quite the imagination, Rita, Atticus replied with a faint smile. He returned to his desk, sat down, and fixed his gaze on her. But I can assure you, I have no intention of becoming the Minister of Magic. Educating young wizards at Hogwarts is both fascinating and meaningful, and I intend to continue doing just that. Oh, you're as stubborn and old-fashioned as Dumbledore in that regard, Rita remarked dully. Almost everyone in the wizarding world knows you aim to succeed Dumbledore. By the way, when will you become the headmaster of Hogwarts? Rita asked casually, aware that Atticus was shrewd and tight-lipped. If he didn't want to answer, he wouldn't. Yet, to her surprise, he responded, not for long. Leaning back in his chair, Atticus intertwined his fingers, an enigmatic smile on his face. It won't take too long. What do you mean it won't take long? Rita asked, her eyes wide with surprise. Ha-ha! It won't take too long. Atticus's deep laughter resonated in the bright office, sending a shiver down Rita Skeeter's spine. Many would find sleep elusive that night. Ms. Bones, well prepared, convened a meeting of all the Aurors at the Ministry of Magic under the guise of addressing the increasingly precarious security situation in the wizarding world. The heads of all departments attended, save for Dolores Umbridge, who was still recuperating at St. Mungo's. Even Cornelius Fudge was present. Atticus Blaine turned his attention to Bones, wary of his behavior. Cacus Foley and Lucius Malfoy, the two directors behind the Daily Prophet, one overt and the other covert, used their influence within the newspaper to ensure that Rita Skeeter's article passed the initial review without a hitch. Mr. Guffey, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Prophet, who had been in contact with Atticus, saw the article but was suddenly called away by an urgent Matt at home. He left his seal with an intern, instructing them to send it out as soon as possible, and hurriedly departed the office. Thus, at midnight, an owl took off from the Daily Prophet's office in Diagon Alley, heading towards the printing workshop. Meanwhile, a Muggle train, chartered by a wealthy businessman of unknown origin, departed from Paris. After 3.5 hours of high-speed travel, it finally arrived at King's Cross Station. Here are all the formalities, Remus said, wearing a round hat. He pulled a blank piece of parchment from his coat and presented it to the Muggle officials with a stern expression. His wand slipped from his sleeve into his palm, and with a quick flick, the Muggles, who had been looking for an excuse to solicit a bribe, suddenly appeared dazed. Oh, it seems to be in order. A pot-bellied Muggle official mumbled incoherently before leaving with his inspection team. Turning to the shocked Percy and the equally stunned Penelope, Remus smiled. When working outside, you need to be flexible. His expression then turned serious. We don't have any extra time to waste. We need to transfer our cargo to the Hogwarts Express as soon as possible. The Muggle train started slowly and eventually stopped in a car inspection shed, where the camouflaged Hogwarts Express had been waiting. At a signal, many thin but agile goblins leaped from the Muggle train carriages. They deftly maneuvered heavy wooden boxes from the Muggle train across the platform and into the Hogwarts Express carriages. The goblins worked swiftly, and within half an hour, all the cargo had been transferred. Let's go! Remus scanned the dim surroundings vigilantly. After confirming that no one was watching, he waved his hand, and the goblins, along with the loyal guards selected and trained from the Learning Machine Workshop, quickly boarded the train. With a loud whistle piercing the night, the Hogwarts Express slowly pulled away from the platform. The train journeyed through endless fields, crossed mountains and rivers, and pierced the mist tinged with the golden light of dawn. After 4 or 5 hours, it finally arrived at Hogsmeade Railway Station. On the platform, Amos Tower, who had been waiting anxiously for half the night, finally breathed a sigh of relief when he saw Remus disembark from the Hogwarts Express. "Was the journey smooth?" Atticus asked, striding towards Remus. Noticing the heavy dark circles under Remus's eyes, he couldn't help but smile. "You look a bit tense, Remus." "Too tense?" Remus replied, finally relaxing after 2 days of tension from the mission. "I couldn't take my eyes off those boxes. You should have come in person for such an important mission. I've never been so scared in my life." "I have full confidence in your abilities, Remus," Atticus reassured him with a smile. His gaze shifted past Remus's shoulder to Percy, who stood several feet away, looking shy and hesitant to approach. "Why, Percy? Don't you want to say hello?" "Oh, no," Percy stammered, panicking. He hurried forward, but then hesitated, stepping back and waving towards the carriage door. A moment later, a figure emerged. The girl with blushing cheeks leaped out of the car. The young man and woman hurriedly approached Atticus Blaine, arm in arm. It felt as if time had rewound to a 1.5 years ago, back to the Three Broomsticks bar. Back then, the young couple, on the verge of parting ways, were filled with uncertainty. "Long time no see, Penelope." Atticus greeted them warmly, a sense of relief in his smile as he looked at the couple holding hands. "So, you two are back together again?" Percy grinned, while Penelope responded shyly, "Long time no see, Professor Blaine. Thank you for bringing Percy back to me." "Oh, it's not my doing, Penelope," Atticus replied with a touch of humor. Then, with a smile, he inquired, "By the way, do you have any plans to get married? I need some time to prepare a wedding gift." Penelope lowered her head, her cheeks flushing even more, but then she looked up with a hint of sadness. "Percy's mom probably doesn't like me very much, so—" "Don't be silly, Penelope," Percy interjected, his smile fading as he spoke earnestly. "Mom's just upset that I moved out of the house, and she blames you for it. But I had to move out sooner or later, right? Just give her some time, and she'll come around." End of this chapter. Chapter 10:30. Waves are coming. The golden morning light, like gentle waves, swept away the thin clouds that veiled the peaks of the verdant mountains. Hogwarts, perched on the cliff and shrouded in mist, appeared and disappeared like a mirage. The tranquility of Hogsmeade Station, where only a handful of staff were on duty, was disrupted by the arrival of an unscheduled train. The goblins moved swiftly, unloading large, magically sealed wooden boxes from the train and loading them onto the carriages, typically used by young wizards. The Thestrals, harnessed to the carriages, raised their heads and neighed twice before pulling the creaking loads towards Hogwarts. After a brief conversation, Remus, Percy, Penelope, and the workshop workers boarded the Hogwarts Express for their return journey. They had ample time to unwind and recover from the intense mental strain of the past 2 days before reaching Diagon Alley Station. Atticus Blaine, however, took on the responsibility of escorting the entire convoy to Hogwarts. The convoy bypassed the grand iron gates of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, driving directly onto the campus and halting only at the marble steps in front of the castle. There, Professor McGonagall and Hagrid, accompanied by the kitchen elves, awaited their arrival. The sight of over 20 carriages, each laden with heavy boxes, neatly parked at the entrance, was nothing short of spectacular. Both Professor McGonagall and Hagrid appeared visibly astonished. "Oh, Atticus!" Professor McGonagall exclaimed, hurrying down the steps to meet Atticus, who had just leaped down from the carriage roof, brushing the morning dew from his hair. "What are all these?" she asked, reaching out to touch one of the boxes with her fingertips, her expression softening. "Well," Atticus replied, stretching with a relaxed demeanor, "most of the gold I acquired from the American wizarding world is still at the Gringotts World Bank headquarters in Paris. I haven't withdrawn all of it, but the gold here should be sufficient to keep the school running smoothly for a year." Professor McGonagall blew her nose loudly, clearly moved and surprised. Yet, she soon crossed her fingers over her chest, displaying a hint of unease. "But this is all your gold, Atticus. I'm not sure if this is appropriate." Atticus offered her a reassuring smile. "Oh, my own gold, Professor McGonagall? I think there's been a misunderstanding. This gold comes from the profits of the Learning Machine Workshop, and the invention of the Learning Machine wouldn't have been possible without the efforts of the Hogwarts professors. It utilizes your knowledge, so the gold rightfully belongs to all the professors. Of course, if you prefer not to invest it in the school's operations." "Nonsense, Atticus," Professor McGonagall interjected with a smile. "Of course we would, though I wouldn't object to a slight increase in the professors' salaries." The three of them laughed heartily at the foot of the marble stairs. For years, the board of directors had been a burdensome presence over Hogwarts. However, for nearly half a century, Albus Dumbledore's leadership had kept the board at bay, preventing them from meddling excessively in the school's affairs. Now, the professors were relieved to have this weight lifted from their shoulders. "You can accomplish anything, Professor Blaine," Hagrid remarked in his deep voice. "If you ever allow me to raise a fire dragon, then—" "That's against wizarding law, Hagrid," Professor McGonagall admonished sternly. "It's not impossible, Hagrid," Atticus replied with a calm smile. "We could establish a fire dragon nature reserve in the Forbidden Forest. It would not only serve as a tourist attraction, it would also help young wizards broaden their horizons. However, now is not the right time to pursue this idea." The sky was already bright, and within the castle, the sounds of early rising wizards descending the stairs could be heard. Under the direction of Atticus Blaine, the house elves began their tasks. Those elves who could apparate within the school simply vanished at the door, taking the boxes with them. As per the previous arrangement, this batch of gold was to be stored in the basement where the professors had hidden the Philosopher's Stone a few years ago. Soon, the house elves had transported most of the boxes, leaving only one behind. Professor McGonagall waved her wand to unlock the remaining box. Wow! As the box opened, a cascade of gold galleons spilled out with a resounding clang. The coins, as large as hubcaps, formed a gleaming hill that scattered a golden glow, stirring excitement under the morning light. "Oh my God!" came a cry of surprise from a young wizard upstairs in the castle. Professor McGonagall immediately turned and glared at him, sternly reprimanding. "Don't you have anything to do so early in the morning, Mr. Finch-Fletchley?" The few young wizards who had peeked out quickly withdrew, remaining silent, though their eyes sparkled with excitement as they exchanged glances. Atticus smiled slightly, understanding that Professor McGonagall had opened the box deliberately to instill confidence in the young wizards. "Hagrid." After scaring off the curious onlookers, Professor McGonagall addressed Hagrid. "Please take this box of gold to Hogsmeade. We need to pay the villagers there. As for the rest, I have a shopping list here. The teaching materials required by the professors of various courses must be collected today. I think Mr. Potter and his team have been through enough." "No problem, Professor," Hagrid replied, pulling his umbrella wand from his pocket and gathering all the gold that had fallen onto the grass back into the box. He then closed the box and directed the Thestrals towards the school gate. "Need a break, Atticus?" Professor McGonagall asked with concern as they walked into the hall together. "I know you barely slept all night." "Thanks for your concern, Professor McGonagall, but I'm afraid I can't," Atticus replied, his voice tinged with emotion. "I've solved one problem, but that doesn't mean I have nothing left to do. Now that the funds are secured, I must prepare intensively for the final match of the Tri-Wizard tournament. I need to hurry and give those kids some training." "Oh, I've decided to let them," Professor McGonagall began. "That's right," Atticus smiled brightly. "The Tri-Wizard tournament is held every 5 years, and we don't know when it will be Hogwarts' turn to host it again. This is a rare opportunity, and I hope more people can get involved." "It's a great idea. I have no problem with it. Just be safe," Professor McGonagall nodded approvingly. In the increasingly dazzling sunlight, the once dormant Hogwarts castle quickly awakened, bursting with vibrant energy once more. When Harry and the others descended to the hall, they were first surprised by the breakfast spread, which was no different from any other breakfast in the past, yet more lavish than a banquet. The rich aroma that filled the auditorium and the overwhelming visual display of various foods made Ron dive into the dining table like a ravenous wolf, without even pausing to ask what was happening. The sumptuous feast also made Harry and Hermione's mouths water, and without much conversation, they quickly joined the eating army. More than 20 large boxes, each containing at least 10,000 galleons, were transported here by Professor Blaine in a horse-drawn carriage. There's no doubt about it. Justin saw it with his own eyes. A few minutes later, when Patil solemnly shared the news she had heard, Harry was momentarily stunned. Professor Atticus Blaine brought at least 200,000 gold galleons to Hogwarts. More than 200,000, more than 10,000, Ron exclaimed, his voice faltering as he paused mid-bite, clearly astonished by the figure. What on earth could possibly challenge him? Harry wondered aloud, swallowing a mouthful of blueberry pudding. His gaze drifted to Professor Blaine, who was engaged in a lively conversation with Professor Sprout at the faculty table. There was a hint of admiration in Harry's voice. "That's not the only surprising thing, Harry," Hermione interjected, her voice tinged with excitement. Harry turned to her quickly, noticing the slight flush on her cheeks as she waved the latest issue of the Daily Prophet, freshly delivered by an owl. "What do you mean, Hermione?" Harry asked eagerly. "Professor Blaine has announced that, due to various actions by the Board of Directors that violated the contract signed by both parties, Hogwarts has officially severed ties with the board," Hermione explained, her voice filled with urgency. "And that's not all. Professor Blaine has openly criticized the Ministry of Magic in the newspapers." As she spoke, Hermione cast a worried glance toward Professor Blaine, who was smiling reassuringly at her from the front of the Great Hall. "Now, the Ministry of Magic will undoubtedly go all out to deal with him." End of this chapter. Chapter 1031, Failed Conquest. Malfoy Manor, nestled in the suburbs, had become a secluded enclave, seemingly cut off from the rest of the world. The brilliant sunshine bathed the earth, transforming the endless wilderness into a golden sea. Yet Malfoy Manor remained perpetually cloaked in a persistent light gray mist, an ominous shroud carrying a faint scent of death. This eerie mist had tainted the once meticulously tended plants, leaving them marred with unsightly black spots. "Is the master up yet?" Lucius Malfoy, his face pale, inquired of his wife as she descended the stairs from the rooftop terrace, a tray of food in hand. Narcissa nodded, gently clasping her husband's slightly cold hand. "Yes, but he seems to be in a foul mood. I don't know what has happened. He hasn't left his quarters in days, has he?" Lucius understood his wife's subtle warning to tread carefully. Offering her a reassuring glance, he took a deep breath and ascended the stairs. As he neared the door bathed in light, his breathing grew erratic. Sensing his turmoil, the peculiar golden snake coiled around his body, resting at his heart, emitted a soothing coolness. Lucius's heartbeat, calmed by the chill, gradually steadied. Truth be told, Lucius had never anticipated that he could conceal his true allegiance from the Dark Lord, a master of legilimency, for such an extended period after becoming a spy for Atticus Blaine. He had braced himself for the worst when he made this perilous decision. Lucius hoped that Blaine and Dumbledore, who shared Blaine's cause, could protect Draco and Narcissa. At the very least, they should strive to safeguard Draco. As for himself, he resigned to leaving his fate to chance, living each day as it came. Unexpectedly, the enchantment Atticus Blaine had cast upon him rendered the Dark Lord unable to detect the treacherous thoughts lurking in his heart. This revelation bolstered Lucius's confidence, suggesting that Blaine's magical prowess might surpass that of the Dark Lord. Lucius could only speculate on this surface-level understanding. In truth, while the Dark Lord's magical power was indeed formidable, his fractured soul was no match for Blaine's intact one. Having chosen to ally with Lucius Malfoy, Atticus Blaine would not stand idly by and allow him to perish. The magic he had bestowed upon Lucius was a concealment spell, crafted by harnessing the power of his soul, sufficient to shield Malfoy's most subversive thoughts from detection. "You still won't respond to my orders." Just as Lucius was about to step through the door leading to the terrace, a hoarse voice, laden with coldness and murderous intent, sent a shiver down his spine, causing his legs to weaken. Before he could shake off the fear, the world before him, once filled with light, plunged into darkness, as if day had abruptly turned to night. A fierce, bloody wind howled outside the door, accompanied by the wailing of ghosts and wolves. In the swirling darkness, 2 flickering spots of blood and the barely audible roar of the Dark Lord nearly drove Lucius to the brink of mental collapse. Yet the darkness came and went swiftly. With a resounding bang, the oppressive gloom dissipated, leaving the world bright once more. A gray mist lingered in the air, resembling a gathering of particles or pure clouds and smoke, much like the mist that enveloped the manor, sickening in its presence. "What's going on?" A voice, colder than the north wind, pierced his ears, jolting Lucius from his daze. His eyes locked with the scarlet pupils of the Dark Lord, and Lucius, drenched in sweat, knelt at the threshold. "I have news for you, my lord." "Oh?" Voldemort's voice carried a sinister undertone, yet the murderous intent was unmistakable. "What do you wish to tell me, Lucius? The negotiations between Atticus Blaine and the school board have collapsed, haven't they? Could it be that Dumbledore conceded so quickly?" "Oh no, my lord." Lucius's knees scraped against the floor as he knelt before Voldemort, his forehead touching the ground. "Hogwarts did not yield because we ceased funding. On the contrary, Blaine has officially declared that Hogwarts no longer requires a board of directors. No need for a school board." Even Voldemort momentarily forgot his anger, his narrow red eyes widening slightly. "That is not what you initially told me, my friend. You assured me that if the Board of Governors withdrew funding, Dumbledore would be forced to close the school." "This is not a lie, my lord." Lucius braced himself for punishment, his breathing becoming erratic as large drops of cold sweat dampened the wooden floor. "You must understand that Hogwarts requires substantial funds to operate daily. Without gold, they cannot endure." "Cannot endure without gold?" Voldemort sneered, clearly dismissing Malfoy's assertion. "So now, Lucius, Hogwarts has lost its financial backing, yet it has not capitulated. Blaine has cast aside the board of directors. Oh, this is quite intriguing. Dumbledore actually permitted him to do this. It seems he can no longer control Blaine." Voldemort smiled sardonically, pleased with his analysis. "Suppose you are correct, Lucius," he continued, as a recliner silently floated over and settled behind him. He leaned back slowly. "Then why did Blaine have the audacity to dismiss you?" "Perhaps. Well, my guess is." Lucius's shoulders hunched. "Blaine found alternative support for Hogwarts, the Learning Machine Workshop. Blaine traveled to the United States to promote it. I believe he secured some gold from it." "So Blaine managed to survive the crisis you and the Ministry of Magic orchestrated for him?" Voldemort remarked lazily, casting a glance at the trembling Lucius. "Is that all you have to report?" "Oh, I brought you a copy of the Daily Prophet, my lord." Lucius timidly retrieved a folded newspaper from his robe pocket, but before he could present it, the newspaper floated from his grasp and hovered before the Dark Lord. "Oh," Voldemort exclaimed, surprised as he scanned a few lines of text. Atticus Blaine publicly declared that the Ministry of Magic's forcible appointment of a commissioner to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was actively directing the flames of political struggle to the school and the children. Interesting. How dare he say that? Voldemort sat up in his recliner, his voluminous robes rustling in the morning breeze. "What a foolish move. It will only draw the Ministry of Magic's attention to him," he said with satisfaction. "But it's advantageous for us. It will divert the Ministry's focus and facilitate our actions." "It is as you say, my lord," Lucius agreed humbly. He cast his gaze downward. The Dark Lord's expression softened slightly, and a faint glimmer appeared in his eyes. "Oh, thank you for bringing me this good news, Lucius. This will keep me pleased for a while. By the way, before you entered, did you see anything?" Lucius's body trembled. "I saw a black fog, master, but I do not understand." "Is that so?" Voldemort narrowed his eyes at the quivering Lucius Malfoy. After a moment, he withdrew his scrutinizing gaze, waved his hand dismissively, and reclined back into the chair. "You may go, Lucius. I have no further tasks for you at the moment." Lucius Malfoy exhaled deeply, feeling as if he had been granted a reprieve, and retreated from the terrace. His legs remained unsteady as he descended the stairs. The portraits lining the corridor seemed to gaze at him with concern, their eyes following his every step. Lucius felt a mix of bitterness and relief in his heart, though a hint of doubt lingered as well. Had the Dark Lord just been engaged in a battle and suffered defeat? But who could have possibly challenged him? End of this chapter. Chapter 1032, Time is on the Side of Justice. Voldemort's prediction was eerily accurate. The statements made by Atticus Blaine in the newspaper were like a boulder cast into a tranquil lake, causing immediate upheaval. The Ministry of Magic was always bustling in the early mornings, whether during war or peace. However, today was different. Every floor of the ministry was enveloped in an unusual silence, and the officials moving up and down the stairs wore anxious expressions. The second level, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, includes the Office for the Prohibition of the Abuse of Magic, the Auror Command, and the Wizengamot Administration. The elevator doors opened, and Sirius stepped out into a corridor lined with doors on both sides. The false windows on the walls allowed bright sunlight to flood the corridor, illuminating it, yet failing to dispel the pervasive unease. Sirius walked down the corridor with a stoic expression, turned a corner, passed through two heavy oak doors, and entered a cluttered open area divided into numerous small compartments. This was the Auror's office, renowned in the British wizarding world. Since Voldemort's return, a surge of nefarious individuals had infiltrated the country through various channels, plunging national security into chaos. The Aurors, already overwhelmed with work, had no time to rest, and the office was nearly deserted. As Sirius entered the public office area, he found it unsurprisingly empty of colleagues. Instead, the wizards behind the two supervisors' desks immediately turned their attention to him. One of these individuals was Rufus Scrimgeour, the nominal head of the Auror office. Scrimgeour's eyes met Sirius's briefly before he looked away, engrossed in the newspaper he held, treating Sirius as if he were invisible. Sirius's brow furrowed slightly. Due to Atticus Blaine, Scrimgeour had initially harbored a strong dislike for Sirius upon his arrival at the ministry. However, in recent days, Sirius had noticed a subtle shift in Scrimgeour's demeanor. The cold hostility had somewhat thawed, and he no longer glared at Sirius with murderous intent. Seated at the other supervisor's desk was Delisi, who, for reasons unknown, had been favored and elevated to a supervisory position by the department's upper echelons. This man, not much brighter than a pig, now wielded considerable power. Under the direct intervention of Cornelius Fudge, the expanded team of enforcers, led by Ms. Bones, had fallen under his control, and the Auror command that once belonged to Scrimgeour was gradually slipping into his grasp. Dawlish's gaze was more in line with Sirius's expectations. Holding a newspaper, Dawlish glared at Sirius with undisguised animosity. His eyes were slightly bloodshot, veins bulged on his forehead, and the corners of his eyes twitched. "You're late, Black," Dawlish spat, his voice dripping with contempt. Sirius met Dawlish's gaze with a cold stare, dismissing his words entirely. After surveying his desk and confirming there were no urgent notices, Sirius raised his head, ignored Delisi's furious expression, and strode through the Auror's office. He pushed open another oak door in the inner room and exited. The sound of newspapers hitting the floor behind him did not faze Sirius. He moved swiftly through the aisle, turned left into another corridor, then right into a dimly lit, dilapidated passageway. At the end of the corridor, a door on the right was slightly ajar, and as Sirius approached, he could hear hushed voices from within. The occupants of the room were alert. The moment they heard Sirius's footsteps, the conversation ceased. A vigilant face appeared in the crack of the door. "Ah, it's Sirius." The wariness on Kingsley's dark instantly upon seeing Sirius. "Oh, Kingsley." Sirius's frosty demeanor softened into a smile. "What are you doing here, Arthur Kingsley? Why aren't you at your seats?" Sirius inquired. "I left for the same reason you did, Sirius. Only Scrimgeour and Dawlish were there, and it was suffocating." Kingsley replied, opening the door wider to let Sirius squeeze into the misuse of Muggle artifacts office. "Fortunately, Perkins took the day off today. Otherwise, this room wouldn't accommodate so many people," Arthur remarked, clearing some papers from his desk and tucking them under the filing cabinet to make space for Sirius to sit. "Thank you," Sirius said with a grin, settling comfortably on Arthur's desk. Have you seen this report from Rita Skeeter about Atticus Blaine and Hogwarts? Arthur waved the newspaper angrily as soon as Sirius was seated. This is outrageous! Outrageous? Sirius echoed, surprised. Who are you talking about, Arthur? Who else could it be? Arthur exclaimed, tossing the newspaper onto the table. The cover photo showed a few young wizards standing timidly beside a dining table in the hall, where only a few pitifully dry slices of bread and potato cakes were laid out. Molly was furious. I never dared to tell her about the conflict between the board of directors and Hogwarts, but now that it's been reported, there's no way to hide it. She knows the board of governors will no longer fund Hogwarts. Fred, George, Ron, and Ginny will all starve at school. I had to work hard to stop her from storming off with a spatula to confront the minister. Arthur sighed, clearly worried about his children's well-being at school. Don't worry, Arthur, Remus interjected, though he didn't reveal that Atticus had called him to escort the gold from Sirius and Amelia. Without permission, he refrained from telling Arthur and Kingsley, offering only comfort. You know Atticus isn't impulsive. Since he announced on behalf of Hogwarts that he would expel the board of directors, it means he has a plan to keep Hogwarts running. Atticus isn't impulsive, but this time, Kingsley interrupted, his concern evident. He wrote in the papers that the minister was openly waging war against children. Most people would feel the same way as Molly after reading those words. The Minister of Magic's reputation is now in tatters. Minister Fudge won't let this go easily and will likely take some rash action in response to Atticus Blaine's accusations. In my opinion, that's not an accusation, Sirius said calmly. It's a declaration of war. Atticus is forcing Fudge to act. I think he's no longer willing to endure the Ministry of Magic under Fudge's leadership, holding him back, as Dumbledore did. A moment of silence filled the cramped office. Arthur and Kingsley exchanged uneasy glances. The resurrected Dark Lord still loomed over the wizarding world. Yet Atticus was choosing to confront the Ministry of Magic first. It didn't seem like a wise decision. While Atticus's extraordinary magical powers might allow him to dismiss Fudge's threats, after a fierce dispute, how would they combat the mysterious adversary? Without the Ministry of Magic as a buffer, the Order of the Phoenix would struggle against the evil forces gathering in the UK from across Europe. How could Dumbledore agree to that? Arthur asked worriedly. Hasn't he always hoped that the minister would? Do you think he'll change his mind and face reality? Arthur asked. Don't you see, Arthur? Sirius replied. Since Voldemort's return, Dumbledore hasn't been as cautious in dealing with him as he was during the last war. He's not as eager to dismantle Voldemort's power, and he seems less concerned about the Order of the Phoenix. Why is that? Kingsley asked, momentarily taken aback before cautiously offering his opinion. Is Atticus Blaine involved? Sirius turned to Kingsley with a meaningful look. Atticus is very young, much younger than Dumbledore, younger than us, and significantly younger than Voldemort. A flash of insight pierced through Kingsley's gloom, and his heavy mood lifted considerably. Yes, that's right. This time is on the side of justice. End of this chapter. Chapter 1033, Settling the Score. Even those with unwavering faith in Dumbledore cannot ignore one pressing question. Dumbledore is already a century old. While his wisdom and magical prowess remain undiminished, if it came down to a contest of longevity against Voldemort, even his staunchest supporters would hesitate to bet on him. Although no one expects the war between them to be resolved in such a trivial manner, Voldemort's strategy has always been to avoid direct confrontation with Dumbledore. Instead, he employs his Death Eaters to orchestrate acts of terror, sowing chaos in the wizarding world. This has led to concerns that Voldemort's plan is to simply outlast Dumbledore. However, the arrival of Atticus Blaine has dramatically altered this bleak trajectory. Not only does Atticus possess profound magical skills, but he also demonstrates a wisdom that rivals Dumbledore's. Crucially, he is nearly 50 years younger than Voldemort. With Atticus in the picture, even if the wizarding world is thrown into turmoil, there remains a glimmer of hope. The Order will eventually be restored, rather than descending into darkness once Dumbledore is too old to continue the fight. Sirius highlighted this crucial point, which brought a sense of relief to Arthur and Kingsley in their cramped little office. Yet, Some issues persisted. But what is Atticus planning to do? Arthur asked, his gaze fixed on a disassembled diagram of a Muggle car engine pinned to the opposite wall. He openly criticized the Minister of Magic in the Daily Prophet. You know Minister Fudge's temperament. He's not a forgiving wizard. Even Sirius doubted that Atticus intended to sever ties with Fudge completely and then eliminate Fudge and his supporters within the Ministry of Magic. Sirius frowned, turning to Arthur. After Atticus's interview, Fudge's approval ratings have plummeted. He stands no chance in the next election. But the next election for Minister of Magic is next summer, Kingsley interjected in a somber tone. There's still a whole year to go, and the minister won't just let Atticus be. He won't sit idly by until he's ousted. Sirius couldn't dispute that. What was Atticus's strategy in pressuring Fudge to join the anti-Voldemort alliance? Sirius shook his head, pondering. Atticus couldn't be that naive. Dawlish! A sudden, furious shout from outside interrupted their thoughts, causing the trio's expressions to change drastically. It's the minister, Kingsley said quickly. Now, immediately. As they rushed from the small room into the corridor leading to the Auror's office, they heard another sharp command from the other side. Gather all your batsmen. I'll give you an hour. Sirius, Arthur, and Kingsley sprinted down the corridor, flung open the oak door, and burst into the Auror's area, just in time to witness Fudge berating a visibly shaken Dawlish. Even Scrimgeour, in the office, looked at Cornelius Fudge with skepticism. At the entrance to the Auror's office, a crowd had gathered behind the half-open door. They had all seen the furious minister storming down from his office and had quietly followed to witness the spectacle. Clang! Sirius pushed the door open first, and as he entered, he was taken aback by the ferocity on Fudge's round face. He had never seen the Minister of Magic look so terrifying. Gathering people, Dawlish stammered, clearly intimidated by the minister's wrath. Atticus Blaine hurriedly moved from his seat to the table, facing the enraged Minister of Magic. His short, stiff gray hair was damp with sweat, a testament to his fear. Of course, no problem, Minister, but what are you planning to do? He stammered. Do what? Fudge snapped, not even glancing at Dawlish. His eyes were fixed on Sirius, cold and predatory like a wolf on the hunt. We're going to Hogwarts to arrest the villain who has tarnished the Ministry of Magic's reputation. A chill seemed to sweep through the Auror's office, silencing the room that had been heated by Fudge's fury. Dawlish, though given a direct order, stood frozen in shock, unsure of what to do. In the tense silence, Kingsley's expression shifted. Using Sirius as a shield to block Fudge's view, he subtly signaled to Arthur, the only person present who wasn't part of the Auror's office. His lips moved silently. I'm sorry, Minister, Arthur said, catching Kingsley's hint. Despite his fear, he forced himself to speak in a steady voice. There's a toilet backflow at Bethnal Green. I suspect it's the work of some foreigners. I need to handle it. Fudge ignored Arthur, his gaze still locked on Sirius, allowing Arthur to make a hasty exit from the office. You want to arrest Atticus? Sirius asked, meeting Fudge's gaze with a hint of sarcasm. For what? What law has he broken, or can the Minister of Magic simply bypass the law and send someone to Azkaban? Fudge's forehead veins bulged visibly, his furious expression making Scrimgeour, who watched with a detached interest, think Fudge might transform into a rabid werewolf and attack Sirius. Didn't you hear me, Black? Fudge's voice was icy. Atticus Blaine has defamed the Ministry of Magic with false statements, severely damaging its reputation. He must be tried by the Wizengamot. Oh, defaming the ministry? Sirius retorted with a disdainful smile. I assume you're referring to what Atticus said in the Daily Prophet. If that's slander, Minister, I suggest you visit the Leaky Cauldron, Diagon Alley, or Hogsmeade. Anywhere people gather, really, and listen to their conversations. You'll find that Atticus's comments in the papers are quite mild. For a moment, Sirius thought Fudge might draw his wand, but the minister managed to restrain himself. His eyes remained fixed on Sirius, his breathing heavy. All right, Black. I know you're in league with Blaine. You. That seems irrelevant to our discussion, Minister, Sirius interrupted contemptuously. We're discussing your reasons for arresting Atticus, which, as you've pointed out, are clearly unfounded. Fudge's mind was ablaze with anger, his red, chubby cheeks quivering. Sirius's words had pushed him to the brink, yet they also brought a sliver of rationality back to his overwhelmed mind. If he wanted to imprison Atticus Blaine in Azkaban, he needed a legitimate reason. Without evidence of a crime, expecting Atticus to submit to the Ministry's power was unrealistic. Arresting Blaine because... Fudge gasped, struggling for justification. You want a reason, Black? Well, Atticus has used the fire of the past multiple times, resulting in casualties. Minister, I must remind you. To everyone's surprise, it was Rufus Scrimgeour who interrupted. He met Fudge's gaze with calm defiance, his dark yellow eyes revealing a hint of something unspoken. Atticus Blaine's voice carried a tone of disappointment and contempt as he addressed Fudge. The spell Atticus Blaine frequently used was called Ghost Fire, not Calendrium Fire. Remember, Minister, this was officially recognized by the Ministry of Magic. Regarding the casualties you mentioned, from what I have observed, it appears there was only one incident, which occurred during the Quidditch World Cup last summer. The Ministry has already attributed all the casualties to Vitia Cleona. Scrimgeour, observing Fudge's speechlessness, added with a hint of satisfaction. Ah, of course, Fenrir Greyback did meet his end under Blaine's Spiritfire curse, if you are determined to hold someone accountable. End of this chapter. Chapter 1034, Position. The words of Rufus Scrimgeour, the official head of Auror Command, plunged the Auror office into a heavy silence. Fudge, along with Sirius and Kingsley, stared at Scrimgeour in astonishment, disbelief etched in their eyes. Everyone present, except for Dawlish, possessed a certain political acumen. Under normal circumstances, Scrimgeour's impartial words might not have been problematic, but in this tense, confrontational situation, his statement carried a deeper significance. After Scrimgeour spoke, Sirius felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He exchanged a knowing glance with Kingsley, both of them maintaining a silent understanding. Minister. Dawlish, who staunchly supported the Minister of Magic, could not endure the tension any longer. He looked at the silent Fudge and tentatively asked, "Should we seriously consider whether it's appropriate to gather people to capture Atticus Blaine now?" The moment these words left his mouth, nearly everyone in the office who opposed the Minister of Magic struggled to suppress their laughter. Even Fudge himself shifted his murderous gaze from Scrimgeour to Dawlish. Fudge's voice, dripping with malice, was enough to haunt one's dreams. "Dawlish, are you going to betray me too?" "What?" Dawlish replied, bewildered and confused. "Oh, of course not. But the reason for arresting Blaine." In truth, Dawlish had no intention of betraying the Minister of Magic, but the thought of leading his men to forcibly arrest Atticus Blaine filled him with anxiety, prompting his question. "No one is going to betray you, Cornelius." At that moment, a sudden commotion outside the door drew everyone's attention. Ms. Bones emerged from behind the oak door, her expression serious. "They disagree with you because they can't find any law to support your order." Ms. Bones approached Fudge, fixing him with an intense gaze. "The Minister of Magic wields great power, Cornelius, but that doesn't grant you the right to do as you please and arrest a resident who has made significant contributions to the British wizarding world and has not broken any laws." Sirius and Kingsley regarded the solemn Ms. Bones with respect, and Scrimgeour nodded slightly in agreement. They dared not confront Fudge directly about his current misconduct. Fudge squinted slightly at the formidable presence before him, then lowered his voice, gritting his teeth. "That's easy for you to say, Amelia. You're not in this position, and you're not the one Blaine insulted. You don't understand at all." "Cornelius," Ms. Bones sighed, interrupting Fudge, "we've debated our differing philosophies many times, and now, regarding your intent to arrest Atticus, I must remind you." Mrs. Bones fixed Fudge with a sharp stare. "First, let's not even discuss the legality of such actions. The third Triwizard Tournament is about to commence. All of Europe is watching us. The previous chaos has already made us the laughingstock of the European magical community. Do you intend to let another incident occur?" Fudge was left speechless, horrified. His concern wasn't that the absence of Blaine would jeopardize the third match of the Triwizard Tournament, but rather, Fudge glanced around, his eyes sweeping over the faces of Bones, Sirius, Kingsley, and even Scrimgeour. Except for Dawlish, everyone in the Auror's office stood against him. Did this mean he was being sidelined? Fudge's face turned pale, and he twisted his back nervously, feeling the cold sweat trickling down. In light of the current tense atmosphere between the Ministry and Atticus, I believe a frank dialogue is necessary, Mrs. Bones suggested. If you're willing, Cornelius, I can negotiate with Atticus to arrange an internal meeting. After the third Triwizard tournament, Sirius's mouth twisted in disapproval, his eyes reflecting the futility of Mrs. Bones's efforts. The rift between Hogwarts and the Ministry of Magic seemed insurmountable, unless one side completely surrendered. Then let's do it, Fudge unexpectedly agreed, surprising everyone in the Embark office. He cast a cold glance at the earnest Mrs. Bones and declared, "After the Triwizard tournament, I will speak with Atticus Blaine. Come on, Dawlish, accompany me." With that, Fudge strode out of the Auror office, leading the bewildered Dawlish. Outside, a commotion stirred among those who hadn't evacuated in time, yet the solemn atmosphere inside the office remained unchanged despite the minister's departure. Is Fudge really willing to negotiate with Atticus? Sirius asked in surprise. But before he could say more, Kingsley standing beside him discreetly touched his arm. Sirius caught on quickly, casting a wary glance at Scrimgeour before falling silent. "This is merely a delaying tactic," Scrimgeour remarked, pretending not to notice Kingsley's subtle gesture or Sirius's distrustful look. He turned to Mrs. Bones, who sat quietly with furrowed brows, and continued in a calm tone, "You must realize, ma'am, that the minister is unlikely to yield to Blaine and Dumbledore. He agreed to your proposal only to buy time." "Delaying for what?" Sirius blurted out, frowning. "To find a suitable reason to imprison Atticus in Azkaban," Kingsley replied, eyeing Scrimgeour with confusion and surprise. Scrimgeour had always aligned with the Minister of Magic, but his recent statements suggested a shift in allegiance. Since Dawlish's Jane in the Emperor's Heart, Scrimgeour had been sidelined. What had prompted him to distance himself from the minister and align with Mrs. Bones? If Kingsley could discern this, surely Mrs. Bones, with her keen political acumen, could as well. She masked her surprise, her mind racing, and smiled at Scrimgeour, who maintained his usual cold demeanor. "What do you think the minister took Dawlish to do, Rufus?" she inquired, testing Scrimgeour's willingness to change his stance. Under Mrs. Bones's gentle gaze, Scrimgeour hesitated briefly, then a sardonic smile crept onto his face. "Isn't it obvious, ma'am? The minister likely took Dawlish to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries to strategize with Madame Umbridge." "I thought so," Mrs. Bones replied with a pleasant smile. "So could you do me a favor, Rufus?" After a moment's hesitation, Scrimgeour nodded. "How can I assist you, ma'am?" "I believe it's crucial for Atticus to know what transpired in this office this morning. Would you mind writing to inform him of the details?" Even Sirius, not known for his intuition, understood Mrs. Bones's intent. He watched Scrimgeour with curiosity and apprehension. This time, Scrimgeour didn't keep them waiting long. "Of course, ma'am," Rufus Scrimgeour agreed calmly. Just 2 hours later, Atticus, who was at Hogwarts, received a letter from Scrimgeour. Another letter arrived simultaneously, this one from Sirius. Comparing the two, Atticus quickly grasped the situation and deduced why Amelia had asked Scrimgeour to write. Gazing at the azure sky, Atticus smiled enigmatically. Fudge and Umbridge likely planned to confront everything after the Triwizard tournament. What they intended to do remained a mystery. "It seems like you've provided a very brief excerpt. If you have a longer passage or additional context that you'd like me to improve, please share it, and I'll be happy to help." Chapter 1035, Something More Important Than Victory. Atticus Blaine withdrew his gaze from the sapphire blue sky, walked to his desk, picked up a thick stack of parchment, and then exited his office. It was 1 week before the Triwizard tournament, on a Friday morning, and time to brief his students about the competition. 10 minutes later, Atticus arrived at the physical education classroom, where the students eagerly awaited his presence. He did not greet them as he usually would. Instead, his bright eyes scanned the faces of each young wizard, as if searching for something. This unusual demeanor immediately caught the attention of the perceptive students. Noticing Professor Blaine's sentimental expression, Harry opened his mouth to speak, but instead glanced at Hermione, who wore a similarly somber look. His heart skipped a beat, and he felt a pang of emotion, realizing his suspicions were correct. "Good morning, everyone," Atticus began. These were the first batch of physical education students he had taught, and the thought of bidding them farewell filled him with a sense of melancholy. However, he quickly composed himself and offered the students a gentle smile. The greetings from the classroom were more enthusiastic and orderly than usual. "So," Atticus said, placing the stack of parchment on the desk and clearing his throat, "we won't have class this period. Let's discuss something else. First, Miss Granger, Mr. Cedric, please step forward." Hermione, who had been listening intently, was taken by surprise. After a small gasp, she hurriedly squeezed past Fred and George to the front of the room. Cedric, leaving Cho Chang's side, joined her at the front. "Now," Atticus addressed the two slightly nervous students, "you both remember that next Thursday is the final event of the Triwizard Tournament?" "Of course, Professor Blaine." Hermione's voice was suddenly sharp with anticipation. "Yes, Professor Blaine," Cedric echoed, his voice tense as he stood beside Hermione. The students, who had been enveloped in a somber mood, suddenly perked up, their eyes fixed on Professor Blaine with renewed interest. "That's good," Professor Blaine said with a nod, looking at Cedric, who was nearly as tall as he was, and Hermione, whose figure had grown more graceful and poised. "Because I have other matters to discuss with the rest of you, I'll be brief. The challenge you will face in the third game is formidable, and I'm afraid there's little hope of victory if you go it alone. Therefore, in the game mechanism I've designed, each champion can have 2 teammates." The announcement was like an unexpected explosion, filling the PE classroom with a buzz of excitement and chatter. Hermione and Cedric exchanged glances, unsure whether to feel surprised or alarmed. In the first 2 events, they had faced fierce dragons and the daunting environment beneath the Black Lake, both of which tested their magical skills and bravery. The third event, crafted by the ever-innovative Professor Blaine, was expected to be even more challenging. Allowing them to choose teammates suggested that the difficulty would exceed their expectations. "Professor Blaine," Hermione raised her hand nervously, "what are the criteria for selecting teammates?" The young wizards immediately leaned forward, eager to hear Professor Blaine's response. Since the school had announced the Triwizard Tournament at the beginning of the year, there had been a palpable sense of anticipation. Every young wizard dreams of becoming a champion in the tournament, battling fiercely on the field, and bringing glory to their school. Yet, the reality is harsh. Only 3 champions are chosen, and though there was an exception when 4 were selected, not everyone shares Hermione's luck to experience such a surprise. Most can only watch from the stands, mere spectators to the spectacle. However, thanks to Professor Blaine's insightful decision, they might now have a chance to participate. This news sent waves of excitement through the young wizards, especially those from Griffin, Dor, and Hufflepuff. "There are no restrictions, Miss Granger," Atticus Blaine said with a smile, "as long as they are students from our school." Harry's heart raced at Professor Blaine's words, his green eyes alight with excitement. This meant the age limit for the Triwizard Tournament was no longer a barrier to becoming a champion's teammate. Could he really join Hermione in the tournament and face the challenges alongside her? "Hey, Scarhead!" Fred turned to Harry, his teeth clenched in determination. "We'll pay 50 galleons for the chance to join. How about it? Deal?" "No," Harry replied with a broad grin, his answer resolute. 60 galleons, then. We promise not to default on the payment," George added, glaring at Harry with mock indignation. "Don't be ungrateful, Scarboy." But Harry remained firm in his refusal. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Even if offered a carriage full of gold, he wouldn't give it up. "As long as they're students from our school," Hermione mused, momentarily lost in thought, before asking excitedly, "Does this mean our teammates don't have to be from our physical education class, Professor Blaine?" "Absolutely, Miss Granger," Atticus Blaine replied with a cheerful smile. "As I've mentioned, we only need wizards from our school. If you wish, you can even choose 2 first-year students, and I won't object." Professor Blaine's earlier response had already sent Harry's heart racing, and now his answer to Hermione's question made Harry's excitement soar even higher. He could hardly believe such a wonderful opportunity was unfolding before him. "I believe you both have made your decisions," Atticus said gently, observing the two champions whose breaths had quickened. Please, tell me the names of your chosen teammates. I'm afraid there's not much time to deliberate. I need your answers now. The classroom, once bustling with chatter, fell silent. All eyes were on Hermione and Cedric, eager to hear their choices. Hermione glanced around at her Gryffindor teammates, the Weasleys, Fred, George, and Ginny, her dormitory roommate, Parvati Patil, and the brave girls on the Gryffindor team, Angelina Johnson, Alicia Spinnet, and Katie Bell. Just days ago, she and Harry had triumphed over Neville Longbottom, a particularly irksome Ministry of Magic official. These were her closest friends in Gryffindor. From their eager expressions, Hermione could almost hear their thoughts. Despite witnessing the perilous first two tasks, they were not deterred but rather eager to join her on the field. While some might have sought the spotlight, their support deeply touched Hermione. Ultimately, she could only choose 2 teammates, leaving many behind. Her eyes conveyed an apology to each friend she passed. Finally, her gaze settled on Harry, who was smiling at her. After giving him a playful glare, Hermione's expression softened into a warm smile. She turned to Professor Blaine, ready to reveal her decision. Winning or losing was not the only thing that mattered. The most important thing is being able to fight side by side with your best friends. This means more than winning the 3-gun championship. I've thought about it, Professor Blaine, Hermione said, her voice trembling slightly. And who might that be, Miss Granger? Atticus Blaine asked with a knowing smile. Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, Hermione replied, taking a deep breath as she revealed her choice, a decision made without much hesitation. End of this chapter. Chapter 136, The True Meaning of Love. Hermione made her choice loud enough for everyone in the classroom to hear. It was no surprise, as all the students in Gryffindor knew that Harry, Ron, and Hermione were inseparable best friends. In their earlier years, the trio was always together. It was only in the higher grades that their schedules occasionally kept them apart. Despite this, some students, like Neville and Ginny, sighed in disappointment. Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, Atticus Blaine nodded to Hermione. It's confirmed, isn't it, Miss Granger? After Hermione affirmed her choice, Atticus turned to Cedric. So what's your choice, Mr. Diggory? Unlike Hermione, Cedric hesitated. He glanced at the Hufflepuff team seated below, his eyes darting among the eager faces, unable to decide. The main team of Hufflepuff students in the physical education class were younger than him. Although they were familiar, they hadn't reached a level of deep trust. Cedric could choose friends from school, like Hermione did, but their skills weren't particularly strong, and relying on luck for the Iron Armor spell was risky. The Tri-Wizard tournament was serious business, and bringing unprepared friends would be irresponsible. After a moment of hesitation, Cedric's gaze settled on his girlfriend, Cho Chang from Ravenclaw. Like Harry, Cho seemed to anticipate this choice, but when Cedric's eyes met hers, her breath caught. Professor Blaine, Cedric said, gritting his teeth. May I speak with Cho Chang first? Of course not, Mr. Diggory, Atticus replied with a smile, raising an eyebrow. Under the teasing gazes of their classmates, Cedric led Cho, whose cheeks were as red as ripe apples, to the back corner of the classroom. There, they turned their backs to the others and whispered to each other. Cho, Cedric began, looking into her eyes, which sparkled like the reflection of autumn waters. His heart pounded as he took her hand. If I ask you to join me in the competition. Cho's eyes were misty, and she bit her lip gently, almost melting under Cedric's loving gaze. Of course I will, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But after her reply, Cedric's expression tightened, causing Cho's heart to skip a beat. What's wrong, Ced? As someone who knew and loved him deeply, Cho could sense the burden Cedric carried. Cedric hesitated, his words faltering. Cho's eyes flickered with understanding, and she quickly guessed his thoughts. You're worried about me, aren't you, Ced? Cho smiled gently, worried I might be in danger during the tournament. I don't know, Cedric admitted, his voice suddenly hoarse as if he had caught a cold. He squeezed Cho's hand tightly. I'm not sure, but you know, the first task involved a dragon, and something went wrong in the second task. Hermione, Harry, and the others claimed to have encountered a mysterious man. At this, Cedric shivered, fear etched on his handsome face. The headmaster of Durmstrang and Mr. Barty Crouch. The third task must be difficult. Otherwise, Professor Blaine wouldn't have allowed us to lead our teammates, Cedric said, his voice tinged with concern. As long as I can help you, I'll... Chu Zhang began, but Cedric interrupted her. I know. Of course I know. Cedric's worried expression suggested that he feared Chu Zhang might face misfortune in the competition. Since the second game, he had been haunted by nightmares of the near disasters that had almost occurred. If he hadn't been the first to rescue Chu Zhang from the lake, she might have been taken away with Harry and the others. Although Professor Blaine had prepared competition uniforms for them, they couldn't eliminate all risks, could they? Now, in the third game, he was about to lead his beloved into danger once more. This was not what Cedric wanted, yet the thought of fighting alongside Chu Zhang was undeniably alluring. Chu Zhang, observing her boyfriend's conflicted gaze, suddenly had a realization. Her presence had become a burden to Cedric. You want to win, right, Ced? She asked, gently, her eyes reflecting the wisdom and gentleness of her heritage. Victory, oh, of course, Cedric replied without hesitation, though he blinked in confusion. But so what, Chu? All warriors dream of winning, right? Chu smiled, withdrawing her hand from Cedric's and instead holding his slightly cold one. I already know how to make the choice, Ced. Meanwhile, back with the Gryffindor team, Hermione glared at George in disapproval. Cedric is also a champion of Hogwarts. You shouldn't speak of him like that. Ah, yes, noble lady warrior, George replied lazily, then turned to Harry with interest. Want to play again, Harry? You guys are just trying to win back the money that stupid Toad from the Ministry of Magic lost to me when he was teased by Hermione and the others, right? Harry rolled his eyes. I'm sorry, but I'm not interested this time. Despite the twins' teasing, Harry couldn't help but feel a pang of loneliness as he watched the couple in the corner. Cedric looks a little surprised, Neville speculated with interest. I guess Chu Zhang suggested some unexpected teammates, and they discussed it. As Cedric and Chu Zhang approached, hand in hand, Atticus Blaine smiled gently. Have you made your decision? He asked, though he had already heard their choice. It wasn't eavesdropping. Rather, the classroom's movements were impossible to hide from his keen senses. Cedric swallowed hard and nodded. Before answering, he glanced at Chu Zhang, drawing strength from her encouraging gaze. Yes, Professor Blaine, we've chosen. Cedric's eyes fell on the two teammates Chu Zhang had advised him to select. One looked confused and shocked, while the other gazed at the ceiling, seemingly counting stars. Neville Longbottom and Luna Lovegood. The classroom fell silent, each student processing their surprise. Oh, are you kidding? Fred exclaimed, his expression exaggerated. Where did you get such a brilliant idea, Cedric? The room erupted in chatter. Harry patted a stunned Neville on the arm, while Luna was surrounded by Ravenclaw students offering congratulations. Hermione pursed her lips, giving Chu Zhang a respectful smile. There was no doubt that they would be the toughest opponents. The noise in the room quickly subsided, punctuated by a few coughs from the front. Atticus Blaine, with a smile on his face and a lively tone, announced, Hermione Granger has chosen Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, while Cedric Diggory has selected Neville Longbottom and Luna Lovegood. Excellent choices. I hope you will place your full trust in your teammates during the upcoming games. Professor Blaine's meaningful gaze left Hermione momentarily stunned. Your opponents have been decided, he continued. Now, I kindly ask the two champions and their chosen teammates to leave the physical education classroom. In the time that follows, I will discuss the final exams with the remaining students. End of this chapter. Chapter 1037. The final exam in physical education. The little wizard's eyes lit up with anticipation at the mention of a final exam in physical education. This was something they had been curious about and eagerly awaiting for quite some time. If it had been an exam in any other subject, Harry would have been thrilled at the prospect of avoiding it. But physical education was different. So, when Hermione hesitantly asked Professor Blaine if they could also take the physical education test, Harry didn't give her an angry glare. I'm sorry, Miss Granger, Atticus Blaine shook his head regretfully. I need the Warriors and their teammates to focus on the competition. As for the final exams, I'm afraid you won't have the opportunity to participate. But, Hermione began to protest. After enduring such rigorous training, It was only natural to feel reluctant to be excluded from the chance to test one's true abilities. However, Professor Blaine didn't give her a chance to argue further. He raised his hand to interrupt her and said with a smile, "Go ahead, Miss Granger. Mr. Weasley doesn't know the news yet. I'm sure he'll be pleased to hear it." With that, Hermione, Harry, Cedric, Neville, and Luna, under the calm and authoritative gaze of Atticus Blaine, left the physical education classroom one by one, visibly disappointed. As the door closed with a click, they disappeared from the view of the remaining students. Atticus Blaine turned his attention to the remaining students, noting the disappointment in their eyes, including Cho Chang, who had the chance to become a Warriors teammate, but chose to step aside so Cedric wouldn't have to bear such a heavy burden and would have a better chance of winning. It was understandable. At this age, full of energy and a desire to excel, who wouldn't want to show off in front of others? Even the Slytherins, including Draco, who had always been disdainful of the two Hogwarts warriors, felt a twinge of reluctance. "All right, let's focus on our own matters." Atticus clapped his hands to draw the little wizard's attention. He snapped his fingers, and a stack of parchment he had brought from his office floated into the air, landing precisely in front of each student. "Please take a look. This is a confidentiality agreement and a security agreement," he announced. "Non-disclosure and security agreements?" Draco muttered, shaking the parchment and squinting as he read the contents aloud. "I volunteer to take part in the final physical education test at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I am fully aware that this test is dangerous and may result in injury and life-threatening consequences. If such situations occur during the project, all consequences and responsibilities will be borne by myself, and Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and Professor Atticus Blaine will not be held accountable. Additionally, no content related to the test may be disclosed to anyone who has not signed the agreement until the test is over." The little wizards exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Finally, they all turned their attention to Professor Blaine, who wore a faint smile. Draco's mouth twisted as an unpleasant memory surfaced. It was from when Professor Blaine first arrived at Hogwarts and became their Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Back then, he had made them sign a similar agreement before introducing the wild idea of creating an Inferi for them to confront. Only one person had completed that test, Harry Potter, the person Draco despised the most. What made it even worse was that Harry had saved him during that test. And now, Professor Blaine was doing it again. "Have you finished reading?" "Is that all?" Atticus Blaine, seemingly unaware that he was revisiting an old topic, chuckled. "Before taking the PE test, everyone needs to sign the agreement in front of them. Any questions?" The young wizards exchanged glances, then shook their heads. Fred and George exchanged a knowing look, each mouthing the word, "scare." No one truly believed that the school or Professor Blaine would disregard their safety. It was merely a tactic to instill a sense of urgency. With no hesitation, the students retrieved quills from their bags and signed their names on the parchment. Even Hannah, the most anxious among them, managed to sign her name under Macmillan's encouragement. Atticus beamed with satisfaction. "I'm delighted that everyone in my class has the courage to take on this challenge. However, I'm afraid I'll have to encroach on your weekends. Please gather in the auditorium at 8 a.m. tomorrow. From there, we'll proceed to the Forbidden Forest." "The Forbidden Forest?" Draco's gray eyes widened in surprise. "What are we doing there, Professor Blaine?" Atticus, busy organizing the security and confidentiality agreements, looked up at Draco with feigned surprise. "Ah, did I forget to mention, the third task of the Triwizard Tournament will be held in the Forbidden Forest. You will be part of the challenge for the champions and their teammates." The students, breathless and wide-eyed with disbelief, listened as Atticus's playful voice filled the classroom. "Of course, the 4 groups of champions and their teammates will also be a challenge for you. If you can't overcome them as a team, well, you'll just have to wait and see." Several students, having been dismissed from the PE classroom, lingered near the door, hoping to overhear details about the final exam. Ultimately, they decided against it. Firstly, a mere door couldn't shield them from Professor Blaine's watchful eyes, and they would surely be caught if they eavesdropped. Secondly, such secrets never stayed hidden for long. By lunchtime, the exam details would likely be the talk of the school. "I didn't expect you to choose Neville and Luna as your teammates," Harry exclaimed, grinning at Cedric as they exited the classroom and entered the corridor. Cedric, slightly embarrassed, scratched his cheek. "Actually, it was Cho Chang's suggestion. I hope you don't think I'm cheating." "Why would we think that, Cedric?" Hermione asked, surprised. "Isn't it obvious?" Neville chimed in, wrapping an arm around Cedric with a grin. "Cedric knows that Luna and I are so formidable, we might just tip the scales of the competition. Sorry, Hermione, but it looks like Cedric has already secured the Tri-Wizard Tournament title." Laughter erupted among them, but no one disputed that Neville and Luna, as PE assistants, were indeed formidable. Cedric, Neville, and Luna didn't join the others for lunch. With the competition only days away and no prior teamwork, they needed to find a place to hone their synergy. Harry and Hermione hurried downstairs, but Ron was nowhere to be found in the hall. "Come on, Hermione, Ron must be in the common room," Harry urged. They turned back, racing up the stairs. 10 minutes later, they passed the fat lady's portrait and entered the Gryffindor common room. "Checkmate!" Ron's triumphant shout greeted them as they entered. Following the sound, Harry saw Ron, Seamus, and Dean engrossed in a game of wizard chess on the sofa nearby. The fireplace crackled warmly, casting a cozy glow over the room where they often gathered. It was no surprise that Seamus had been defeated. Ron's prowess in wizard chess was likely unmatched by any young wizard at Hogwarts, professors included. "You're amazing, honey," exclaimed Lavender, perched on the armrest of the sofa beside Ron. Her excitement surpassed even Ron's own. Ignoring his attempts to stop her, she leaned down, cupped his face, and kissed him. Her unabashed affection stirred a twinge of jealousy in both Harry and Hermione. "Oh, come on." Seamus and Dean jeered playfully as Ron, his ears turning crimson, wiped the kiss from his cheek. Spotting Harry and Hermione at the lounge door, he sprang to his feet, flustered. "Oh, you're back," Ron stammered, unsure of what to do with his hands. He glanced at the grandfather clock atop the chest of drawers, eyebrows knitting in confusion. "But isn't physical education class just starting? Did Professor Blaine take leave again?" "There was an unexpected situation, if you're interested, Ron," Harry replied, his words somewhat stifled by Lavender's presence, which made open conversation difficult. "What nonsense, Harry." Ron extricated himself from Lavender's embrace and hurried over to his friends. His cheeks still flushed, he tried to act as if nothing had happened. "So what happened? Could someone kindly fill me in?" End of this chapter. Chapter 10-38. Private Chat. "What? You want me to join you?" Ron exclaimed, his eyes widening in disbelief as Harry excitedly shared the news that the three of them would be participating together in the Tri-Wizard Tournament. Ron's mouth hung open, wide enough to fit an egg. This was the Tri-Wizard Tournament, broadcast live to the entire European wizarding community, with countless wizards eagerly following the event. Competing was not only a tremendous honor, but winning promised a substantial reward in galleons. Ron vividly remembered the start of the school year when Hermione was chosen as the tournament champion. His jealousy had led to a falling out with both Hermione and Harry. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine he would one day stand on the competition field with them, fully justified. The news left not only Ron, but also Lavender, Seamus, and Dean, who overheard the conversation, utterly stunned. "Have you really decided?" Ron asked, his face pale, despite being caught in an intimate moment with Lavender by Harry and Hermione. He looked at Hermione, stammering, "You want me as your teammate?" "Unless you don't want to," Hermione replied, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, no, of course I do." Ron bit his lip. "But your teammate in physical education, Neville, might be a better choice. His skills with a sword could be more useful than mine." Lavender grew anxious, but before she could speak, Harry silenced her with a stern look. "Neville's already been picked by Cedric, Ron," Harry explained. "What about Ginny?" Ron's breathing quickened, his tone more like he was trying to convince himself than Harry and Hermione. "She's your teammate in gym class too, isn't she?" "Hermione, I know Ginny is quite capable." "Yes, that's right," Hermione said calmly, "but I've chosen you. I've already submitted your name to Professor Blaine. There's no changing it now." If you don't want to join, Harry and I will go to the arena alone. Ron's face flushed red again. Of course I want to, Hermione, but I might hold you back. I'm not as skilled as you. Don't be silly, Ron, Hermione said with a smile. We know you've worked hard, and I'm sure you'll cooperate well with Harry and me. Ron finally smiled too. The group returned to the sofa by the fireplace, and the atmosphere relaxed. So, did Professor Blaine tell you what the third round will involve? Seamus asked eagerly. Oh, I don't know, Hermione replied, looking a bit distressed. His sense of confidentiality is much better than that of the Ministry of Magic. All we know is that the venue is in the Forbidden Forest. The Forbidden Forest, Dean said in a slightly awed tone. The possibilities are endless. There are all sorts of dangerous magical creatures there. But since you've already faced a dragon in the first match, Harry began to object. There are creatures as dangerous as dragons, or even more so, Harry, Hermione said, her face turning pale as she considered the possibilities. The New York Ghost reported that Professor Blaine once dealt with a Nundu leopard in New York. That creature is as fast as lightning, and its breath is extremely poisonous. It's said that it takes 100 wizards to handle a Nundu leopard. If we encounter one... Hermione's expression grew anxious and uneasy. Should we head to the library now to find out if there's a way to restrain a Nundu leopard? She suggested. It's all uncertain, Hermione, Harry said rationally. I suggest we ask Hagrid. No one knows the Forbidden Forest's dangerous creatures better than he does. Atticus Blaine's brown eyes flickered with desire, but then she hesitated. No, Harry, that's cheating, she said. Harry rolled his eyes inwardly, anticipating Hermione's characteristic pedantry. Go ask, Hermione. Ron, despite deciding to participate, felt his lips turn pale with nervousness. Isn't gathering intelligence one of the tests in the Triwizard Tournament? He asked, stating a fact. Hermione frowned, lost in thought, while those around her continued to persuade her. Oh, stop it! Ione shouted, clearly annoyed. I need to think carefully about whether this is appropriate. Harry and Ron exchanged a look, both wearing expressions of helplessness. Yet, through their eye contact, they reached a silent agreement. Regardless of whether Hermione was willing to ask Hagrid for special treatment, they would proceed to ask anyway. By lunchtime, word had spread that each champion could be accompanied by 2 assistants. The young wizards in the Great Hall were buzzing with discussions on 2 topics. One was the reason behind Professor Blaine's decision to implement this rule, and the other was the final exam for the physical education class. Professor Blaine won't let me talk about it? Harry asked, looking at Fred and George, who were grinning mischievously. But what's so secretive about this? Hermione also cast a questioning glance at Ginny. I'm sorry, Hermione, Ginny replied with an apologetic smile, though there was a hint of playfulness and expectation in her expression. Professor Blaine asked us to sign a confidentiality agreement and a security agreement. Confidentiality and security agreements. Harry blinked his green eyes, recalling the thick stack of parchment that Professor Blaine had brought to class. He also remembered the ingenious practical lesson in Defense Against the Dark Arts during his second year. Could it be that? Harry exclaimed, staring at Fred and George in amazement. Professor Blaine wants you to deal with many and fairy at once? Ahem, don't ask, George said with a smile, though his serious tone prompted Harry and the others to roll their eyes in exasperation. Ask and you can't tell. While the young wizards anxiously discussed these issues over their meal, Atticus Blaine was also addressing the other 2 champions in the student safety office. That's the rule, Atticus said to Victor, Fleur, and Madame Maxime, raising 2 fingers with a smile. You can each choose 2 helpers for yourself, and the selection is limited to the young wizards you brought from your school. After a brief silence, Madame Maxime voiced her displeasure. That's not fair, Atticus. We have a limited number of students, while the 2 champions from Hogwarts have a wider range to choose from. She glanced at Fleur, who was deep in thought, and held up 3 fingers adorned with emerald and opal rings. The champions of Durmstrang and Beauxbatons should have 3 helpers. I'm sorry, ma'am, Atticus replied with a smile, shaking his head. While I understand your point that the Hogwarts champions have a broader selection, the students from Durmstrang and Beauxbatons are all contenders for the champion status. They are the elite of your respective schools. Even if all the students from both schools were here, assistants would still be chosen from among them. Madame Maxime wanted to argue further, but Atticus continued. The assistants chosen by the 2 Hogwarts champions are all minors. The youngest, Luna Lovegood, is only 13 years old and in her 3rd year, ma'am. Therefore, I cannot agree to your request. Madame Maxime was left speechless. Victim, Atticus said, turning his attention to the older boy across the sofa. Regarding the situation of the 3rd game, I have informed your headmaster, Dregern, in advance. He will arrive at Hogwarts. This weekend evening, I want to offer you encouragement and guidance. Victim nodded silently, his expression softening, losing its previous sinister edge. That's the situation, Atticus Blaine said as he stood up, his voice gentle. If you have no further questions, I believe we can head down together. Wait, Farong interjected, raising her hand. If you don't mind, could I speak with you alone? End of this chapter. Chapter 1039, Another Failure. Both Madame Maxime and Victor exited Atticus Blaine's office. Before stepping out, they glanced back at Atticus and Fleur, who were seated on the sofa. Madame Maxime's gaze lingered on Fleur, filled with a sense of pity, clearly aware of Fleur's admiration for Atticus. Victor's expression was simpler. He seemed concerned about Fleur's decision to stay, perhaps wondering if she intended to seek additional information about the final competition from Professor Blaine. Click, the door lock clicked shut, leaving the office in a momentary silence. Fleur sat gracefully on the sofa, her gaze fixed on Atticus with a look that was both fiery and tender. If you were hoping to get some extra information about the competition from me, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you, Fleur, Atticus said, leaning back on the soft sofa. He interlaced his slender fingers and smiled gently at her. I didn't even have time to congratulate you. Fleur knew Atticus was joking and didn't truly suspect her of seeking information. She lifted her delicate nose, her silver hair cascading over her shoulders, her clear blue eyes openly admiring him. You've solved another crisis for Hogwarts. I've never seen a wizard like you. It seems nothing is too difficult for you. Atticus offered a restrained smile, neither modest nor delving further into Fleur's praise. He nodded gracefully in gratitude and shifted the conversation. What was it you wanted to talk to me about, Fleur? Having spent considerable time with Atticus, Fleur was accustomed to his habit of changing the subject when emotions ran high. She sighed inwardly, but showed no outward disappointment. Straightening slightly, her blue silk school uniform accentuated her graceful figure. Oh, I just wanted to ask your opinion on something, she said, her tone casual, though Atticus detected a hint of pride and challenge beneath her demeanor. What is it, then? Atticus asked calmly. Well, Fleur raised her chin slightly. I've discussed this with my parents, and they support my decision. They agree that I should stay in the UK to work after graduating from Beauxbaton this summer. She touched her plump pink lips with a finger, noticing the helplessness in Atticus's eyes, and smiled playfully. I'm hesitating, Atticus, whether I should apply to join the British Ministry of Magic. Alternatively, your learning machine workshop is also a very good company. I would like to seek your advice. Silence enveloped the room. Atticus said nothing, his gaze complex as he looked at Fleur. Despite having tried to dissuade her feelings, Fleur remained steadfast, her tenacity and courage undiminished. Atticus regarded the girl, whose beauty and sincerity were undeniable, and felt a stir of emotion. After a long pause, he lowered his eyes to meet Fleur's bright gaze and said softly, I don't particularly admire your choice, Fleur, and I think you should know. Of course, I know, Fleur interrupted, anticipating his words. You mean to say that you know who has been resurrected and the British wizarding world is no longer safe? She spoke with calm determination, not truly seeking Atticus's opinion, but rather affirming her own resolve. Decide on the next steps. Atticus Blaine was torn between joining the Ministry of Magic or pursuing studies at the machine workshop. However, Farong had already made her decision. Rising gracefully from the sofa, she smoothed the wrinkles on her skirt with her slender fingers and looked at Atticus with a calm, determined expression. I've made up my mind to stay here, she declared. Without waiting for his response, she left the sofa, held her chin high, and swiftly exited Atticus's office. By noon, the scorching sun bathed the office in a dazzling golden hue. Atticus felt the heat intensify, tugging at his collar impatiently as he frowned at the distant green mountains, which appeared lifeless under the relentless sun. After a long pause, a sigh escaped him, and he slowly stood up, leaving his office behind. As the sun descended from its zenith into the vast abyss of the universe beyond the horizon, Hogwarts remained enveloped in the sweltering heat of midsummer. That evening, a young wizard ventured out for exercise, but after just 2 laps around the playground, he was drenched in sweat. Atticus spent the afternoon in Severus's office, appreciating the coolness of the underground space. He considered discussing the troubles Furong had brought him, but decided against it, fearing it might cause Severus undue distress. Instead, he shifted the conversation. "By the way, has Voldemort been up to anything interesting lately?" he inquired after some casual chatter. "You know what he's been planning, Atticus," Severus replied, tapping the figs in the wooden frame on the table with his wand. He watched as the fig skins peeled away gracefully, flying onto the iron rack to dry. Atticus shook his head, letting out an ambiguous sigh. His nonchalant attitude puzzled Severus. "You're not worried at all?" Severus asked, tilting his head and squinting at Atticus, who was lounging at his desk, feet propped up. "Do you think the Dark Lord will fail?" Severus pressed. "No," Atticus replied, interlacing his fingers behind his head and gazing at a large jar of fire-ash snake eggs hanging from the dark brown ceiling slabs. A strange smile played on his lips. "I think he will succeed. If Voldemort can't plan this well, then he won't accomplish anything." "In that case," Severus said, turning his attention from the figs to Atticus, who seemed relaxed and content, "why aren't you worried? You know that if the Dark Lord succeeds in rescuing his Death Eaters, the wizarding world will be at peace again, and you seem to be looking forward to this happening." "I am indeed looking forward to it," Atticus admitted, knowing Severus would be perplexed. "I have a plan, and its success hinges on whether Voldemort can rescue his loyal Death Eaters." "What's the plan?" Severus asked immediately. "What are you planning to do?" Atticus smiled, but before he could respond, his expression shifted. He turned his head toward the wall, just as a beautiful phoenix, shimmering with silver light, passed through and hovered before him. "Ah, you're back, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus greeted. "Good evening, Atticus and Severus." "I trust I have not disturbed your conversation," Dumbledore said. Severus, uninterested, resumed his work with the figs. "Of course not. We were just chatting," Atticus replied, stretching. He knew Dumbledore had something important to discuss. "I'll head to your office, Headmaster, and we can decide on the next steps." 10 minutes later, Atticus Blaine entered Dumbledore's office. The headmaster sat behind a delicate, thin-legged desk, looking weary, with a hint of sadness etched between his brows. Atticus immediately understood the situation. "So we failed again this time?" he asked. "Ah, you've guessed it, Atticus?" Dumbledore replied with a faint smile, emerging from his statue-like stillness. He leaned back in his chair, his azure eyes tracing the intricate patterns on the office's domed ceiling. "Yes, as you expected. My old friend, Professor Horace Slughorn, remains unwilling to reveal the truth." Atticus pulled up a stool and sat across from Dumbledore, joining him in contemplative silence. Dumbledore had been attempting to breach Slughorn's defenses for quite some time, but to no avail. Yet Slughorn might possess crucial information. The flickering candlelight cast shifting shadows across Atticus's face. "What if I try to contact him?" he suggested. End of this chapter. Chapter 40. Coming on a midsummer night, even the moonlight streaming through the window into the headmaster's office felt warm. Dumbledore's blue eyes, peering over his half-moon spectacles, studied Atticus Blaine for a few moments before he offered a wry smile. "You don't know my old friend, Atticus. Unfortunately, he is not the type of wizard who responds well to threats. Moreover, after Tom, he is likely to be cautious of a talented young wizard like you." Seeing that Atticus's gaze remained steady, Dumbledore added, "Horace has mastered advanced occlumency techniques. Legilimency won't work on him. Considering he taught a wizard like Severus, who excels in potions, Veritaserum might not be effective either." Atticus shrugged. If Dumbledore was determined not to endanger his old friend, then certain methods were off the table. However, contact was still necessary. "I once heard from Dirk Cresswell, head of the Goblin Liaison Office under the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, that he is Professor Slughorn's favorite student. Dirk, a Slytherin alumnus, trusts me greatly. Perhaps I can reach Professor Slughorn through this connection. As long as you don't intend to use magic to pry open Horace's mind, Atticus, I have no objection to you trying. Perhaps you can indeed find common ground with him, Dumbledore said with a smile, though it was clear he held little hope. With a sigh, Dumbledore turned his gaze to the dim candlelight flickering from the chandelier. Horace is unwilling to provide us with any valuable information for now. The most pressing matter is to confirm the location of Tom's Horcrux, particularly the underground vault at Gringotts. Did he entrust it to one of his Death Eaters imprisoned in Azkaban, like the diary? And did that Death Eater hand it over to a goblin for safekeeping before their imprisonment? I will confirm this as soon as possible, Atticus replied calmly. When the time comes, I'll need your Order of the Phoenix to cooperate with me. Oh, that's no problem, but... Dumbledore's silver eyebrows arched in surprise at Atticus's confident tone. You've got a good plan, haven't you? Can you persuade Banat to let us inspect those vaults? I will not make such a request to Banat. It would be like digging at the roots of the goblins, Atticus said. I have another way. I can't use it now, but the time will be ripe soon. Having dealt with Atticus for some time, Dumbledore had come to understand his methods. His eyes narrowed slightly. I must remind you, Atticus, that we cannot let Tom know we are searching for his Horcruxes. There was no need to elaborate. Atticus understood this implicitly. The two moved from their desks to the window of the headmaster's office, silently gazing at the bright, moonlit campus. Have you encountered any difficulties in the Triwizard Tournament? Dumbledore asked. Everything is well arranged, and there will be no issues during the competition, Atticus replied, his voice tinged with emotion. But be prepared. The war will begin once this tournament concludes. Suddenly, a strong wind swept through the Forbidden Forest. Dumbledore said nothing, merely gazing into the distance. His silver beard swayed in the breeze, and his aged face appeared even more worn in the moonlight. The moonlight climbed over mountains and crossed waters, eventually reaching the top of a castle tower perched on a cliff. It slipped quietly through a window into a simple room. The gray-haired old man, asleep on the bed, seemed to sense something and abruptly opened his eyes. His eyes, clouded with a white film, stared blankly at the ripples of moonlight on the rock wall as he slowly rose from his lying position, barefoot. Stepping onto the cold stone floor, the old man approached the window, gazing out with an expressionless face at the monotonous scenery that remained unchanged through spring, summer, autumn, and winter. In summer, the snow blanketing the earth melted swiftly, revealing the mountains' black, jagged, and ominous forms that had been hidden for most of the year. After a prolonged silence, the old man shifted his gaze from the window to the bed, focusing intently on an exquisite, classical pocket watch resting beside the pillow. His pale lips moved slightly as he walked over and picked up the watch. Opening its cover, he stared at a photograph inside. The image depicted an old man and a little girl. His eyes lingered not on the old man's face, but on the little girl, whose smile, though seemingly innocent and lively, carried a hint of deliberateness and detachment. As he gazed at her, the old man's face, lined with wrinkles like the bark of an ancient tree, subtly changed expression. Time slipped away quietly in the cold, dry wind. The moonlight streaming into the room gradually faded as the moon ascended higher into the night sky, and the room slowly descended into an abyss of darkness. Click! As the portrait in the photo was swallowed by the shadows, the old man closed the watch and slowly climbed into bed. When the last ray of moonlight left the room, he lay back and closed his eyes. The white film covering his eyes seemed to be swept away by the wind, and a glimmer of silver light flickered in the center of his pupils. The next morning, Harry, Hermione, and Ron hurried to Hagrid's hut, only to find the long boundary between the Forbidden Forest and the field cordoned off with ropes. Hagrid was absent from his cabin, and even Fang was not sleeping by the door. "What happened?" Harry asked in astonishment as they circled to the back of the house, standing at the edge of the Forbidden Forest and observing the no trespassing signs affixed to the tree trunks at intervals. Is there anything else to say? Hermione swallowed, her voice tight. Professor Blaine has sealed off the Forbidden Forest. No one is allowed to enter. They are probably preparing for the competition. Hagrid is likely helping out in the Forbidden Forest. But if he plans to use this, Ron muttered, reaching out to touch the rope. A scream shattered the silence of the Forbidden Forest, echoing like the dying cries of Karkaroff under the Cruciatus curse inflicted by multiple Death Eaters. The trio standing by the forest covered their ears simultaneously, their faces contorted in pain. What on earth is that noise, Hermione? Ron stumbled back. It sounds like Percy singing. Oh, I don't know, but I guess, Hermione shouted over the din. Maybe it's a howling spell, a type of magic used for warnings. Without another word, the three fled in panic, racing towards the field. Miraculously, as they passed Hagrid's hut and distanced themselves from the Forbidden Forest, the tormenting sound abruptly ceased, replaced by the gentle breeze and the soothing sound of waves. They didn't hear it, Harry panted, noticing a group of young wizards still flying around on their broomsticks on the lawn, laughing and playing, seemingly unaffected by the dreadful noise. Obviously, Hermione replied, her face pale, still shaken by the noise, even retching twice. The noise is confined to a specific range. Maybe it's targeting certain people. The three of them exchanged glances for a few moments before bursting into laughter. I'm so relieved that Professor Blaine doesn't usually resort to such tactics, Harry remarked with a shrug. Otherwise, Hogwarts would lose a lot of its charm. If that were the case, Ron added, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead, Fred and George might just protest by dropping out of school. Judging by the current situation, it seems Hagrid might have been coerced into signing a confidentiality agreement. I was hoping to extract some peculiar ideas from him, Hermione said with a cheerful smile. It appears the third task isn't about intelligence gathering, but rather about handling emergencies. That's not exactly comforting news for me, Ron replied with a grimace, prompting another round of hearty laughter from the trio as they stood in the playground under the bright daylight. As the days passed, the sun rose and set, and the moon waxed and waned. The final exams of the school year were in full swing. Seemingly overnight, a massive viewing platform had sprouted on the Hogwarts grounds. 4 iron poles, as tall as Quidditch goalposts but much thicker, were erected at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Each pole was crowned with a gigantic screen. Nearby, a spacious enclosed tent had been set up, where the fairies had already moved in and begun setting up the live broadcast equipment. At dawn, the first light of morning crept into the dark dormitory, and Hermione suddenly opened her eyes in bed. The final of the Triwizard Tournament had begun. End of this chapter.